Something felt off. He was yelling angrily, then stormed off, saying, "No way am I letting some old woman stay in my house anymore. I want a divorce." I was shocked by his sudden demand for a divorce, but I only had one answer. "Yeah, okay." "What?" Jack exclaimed, sounding completely shocked. "Are you serious?" "Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I'm 47 years old and work in an office. Jack, my husband of 23 years, is 50. He's a senior manager at a regular company. When we first got married, Jack loved me deeply, and we were happy together. But over time, our relationship grew cold. We have a daughter, Lily, who recently graduated from college. Once she started her job, she moved out to live on her own. After she left, it was just Jack and me at home, and we barely talked. When we did, it usually turned into an argument. Jack never helped with house chores. His laziness annoyed me more and more every day. One evening, I came home late from work. As soon as I walked in, I saw Jack lying on the couch, watching TV. He knew I had just come in, but he didn't say a word or even look my way. I thought, if you're home before me, can't you at least cook dinner or tidy up a little? But Jack never did anything like that. He was the type to leave his dirty clothes all over the place. "Can you at least put your clothes in the laundry basket?" I asked. "Yeah, I'll do it later," he replied lazily. "When is later?" "After dinner. I'm starving." "Where's dinner?" "Are you serious right now?" I snapped. "I just walked in the door. If you want dinner so badly, either wait or help me make it." "No way. I'm exhausted from work. And house chores, that's a woman's job. Stop complaining and just do it." "You know, the way you talk to me is so disrespectful," I said angrily. "Who cares? I'm the boss. Everyone at work loves me." "I don't believe that. I doubt anyone there actually likes working with you," I retorted. "That's enough. What a nagging wife you are. This is all your fault for working so late in the first place. It's the busy season. Everyone is working late, not just me," I explained. "Well, if everyone's doing overtime, they must all be terrible at their jobs," Jack mocked. "Don't insult my coworkers like that. Then quit your job if it's so hard." "Why should I? I like my job, and you were the one who said I could keep working when we got married. That was years ago. Now it's just pathetic that your company still employs someone as old as you." "Pathetic?" I shouted. "Don't talk to me like that. I'm just being honest. Now stop arguing and get dinner ready." "I'm done with this," I said, grabbing my bag. "I'll go eat out instead." "What? Seriously?" I didn't respond. I walked out the door, ending the ridiculous argument. That's how it always was with Jack, constant fighting. When our daughter Lily still lived at home, we had family conversations. But ever since she moved out, all Jack and I do is argue. I thought we got married because we loved each other. How did our relationship become so distant and cold? When Jack and I first met, he did everything he could to win me over. He was kind, attentive, and went out of his way to make me happy. He proposed to me, and back then, I thought being loved and getting married was the ultimate happiness for a woman. Now the fact that Jack had turned into someone so distant and uncaring made me feel disappointed and angry. Over the past few years, I started noticing things that didn't feel right. I even suspected Jack might be cheating on me, but he was always careful, and I couldn't find any solid proof. I thought about hiring a private investigator, but a part of me still wanted to trust him. After 23 years together, I didn't want to give up on our relationship. Even though things were tough, I kept working hard at my job and managing the house. Then, one day, Jack said he had something to tell me. "What is it?" I asked, feeling uneasy. Suddenly, Jack exploded with anger. He yelled, "I can't stand being around an old woman anymore. I want a divorce." I was stunned, but deep down, I wasn't entirely surprised. "Yeah, okay," I said calmly. "What?" Jack looked completely shocked. "Are you serious? We're talking about a divorce, right? I know what it means. It's the end of our marriage. Don't you care about what people will think?" "I don't care. Plenty of people get divorced. Why should I be any different?" Jack hesitated, looking confused. "I didn't think you'd agree so easily. You're the one who brought it up. What were you expecting? That I'd beg you to stay?" "No, I just didn't expect this," Jack admitted. "Then let's get it over with. Do you have the divorce papers ready?" "Not yet. he said, clearly caught off guard. I shook my head and sighed. Seriously? You brought this up without even being prepared? How typical. Shut up. I'll go get them now. Jack yelled and stormed out to find the papers. When he came back, I looked him straight in the eye. Are you absolutely sure about this? Just sign the damn papers, he shouted. Fine, I said. But let me make one thing clear. I'm not the one who's been unfaithful. Why are you suddenly saying all this? I told you I'm not having an affair, Jack yelled. Honestly, it's more suspicious that you're denying it so much, I replied. Let's just sort out the property and make everything clear. Jack looked surprised that I was so calm about the divorce. I guess he didn't expect me to agree so easily, but with the way he'd been treating me lately, who wouldn't want a divorce? I had a stable job, and we had no financial problems. I didn't need him to live my life. After the divorce was finalized, I called our daughter, Lily, to tell her about it. As expected, she was shocked at first. But then she said, Honestly, Mom, I'm not that surprised. I've seen how he talks to you, and I get why you'd agree so quickly. By the way, I asked, has he called or texted you since the divorce? Not yet, but I'm sure he'll try today. Jack always spoiled Lily to make up for the fact that he wasn't around much when she was growing up, but Lily didn't have much respect for him. When she was little, he was always too busy with work to show up for school events or parent-child activities. It made her feel really lonely, and as she got older, seeing how he treated me only made her dislike him more. Honestly, Mom, he's such a jerk. The worst father ever. Oh wait, he just texted me. What did he say? He said he's lonely and wants me to come over. I sighed. Well, you don't have to go if you don't want to. I don't want to see him at all. But I'm so glad I can see you without any drama now, Mom. Let's go out for dinner sometime. Of course, I said, smiling. Yay, but seriously, Mom, why did Dad ask for a divorce so suddenly? It's weird. Well, I said, thinking back, he kept denying he was cheating on me, even though I never asked. Maybe he's actually having an affair. If he is, that makes him an even bigger jerk. Yeah, but I'm just guessing. If it's true, I don't ever want to see him again. After we finished talking, I hung up the phone. About a month later, Lily and I met at a cafe. Mom, it's been a while. You look amazing, you're glowing. Thanks, I said. Maybe it's because I'm finally stress-free. You're living on your own now, right? Yeah, I moved into an apartment near my office. The commute is easier, and I don't have to clean up after anyone else anymore. I have more time to spend with friends and enjoy my hobbies. I'm just happy now. That's so great to hear. Honestly, I wish you divorced him sooner. You're right. Who would want to stay married to someone with his attitude? Exactly, and the way he talked to you. Did you know he called you an old hag? He actually said that. That's disgusting. Lily looked a little uncomfortable and hesitated before speaking again. Mom, remember when you mentioned Dad might be having an affair? Yeah. Well, I got curious, so I hired someone to look into it. I blinked in surprise. You did? Did you find anything? She handed me a folder. Here are the results. My heart raced as I opened it. Inside were pictures of Jack holding hands with a younger woman, laughing and looking happy. There were also photos of them entering hotels and other places together. So he was cheating on me, I said quietly. Yeah, Lily replied. There's no other explanation. I felt a wave of emotions, anger, sadness, and relief. I had been right all along. Jack had left me for another woman. Huh? Mom, there's no time to feel sad about this, said Mia, my daughter. We have all the evidence. I think it's time to get alimony from Dad. I know, I said, but how did you pay for the private investigator? You don't need to worry about that right now. Once you get alimony, it'll all work out. But I'm not sure how to prove his cheating. He could claim it all started after the divorce. Actually, Maya said, smiling slyly, I already have solid proof. What? What do you mean? She pulled out another document and handed it to me. These are screenshots of Dad's chats with his girlfriend. I stared at her stunned. How did you get this? Well, she said, grinning, I visited him one day. I cooked him a nice meal and made sure he had plenty of wine. He was so happy and drank way too much. When he passed out, I used his fingerprint to unlock his phone and took screenshots of his WhatsApp messages with her. Then, I sent them to myself. "Oh, Mia, you're amazing," I said, my voice full of pride. "I couldn't just stand by and let him get away with this after everything he's done to you. Now we have enough proof to win." "Yes, you're absolutely right. Thank you, Mia. We'll fight him and his girlfriend together." A few days later, we arranged to meet Ryan, my ex-husband, at a cafe. Mia came along with me for support. When Ryan saw us both, he frowned. "Why is she here?" he asked, pointing at Mia. "I don't want to see you either," Mia said coldly, "but I'm here for Mom. We have something important to discuss." "What do you want now?" Ryan asked, already defensive. "You were having an affair, weren't you?" I said calmly. Ryan scoffed. "I told you during the divorce. I wasn't cheating." "Well, you can't fault the evidence we've collected," I replied, pulling out the photos. I spread them across the table. Ryan's eyes widened. "This is ridiculous. I started seeing her after we divorced, so this doesn't prove anything." "Actually," I said, pulling out the screenshots, "there's more. These are your WhatsApp conversations with her. Look at the dates. They're from before we divorced. This is solid proof of your cheating." "How did you get this?" Ryan demanded, his face pale. "Remember the night Mia came over and made dinner for you? She looked at your phone while you were passed out." He went through my phone? That's completely inappropriate," Ryan shouted. Mia glared at him. "Don't talk about inappropriate. You destroyed this family, and now you're mad that we found proof. Spare me, I can't stand you." Ryan's face turned even paler at her words. "Mia, you don't mean that." "I do," Mia said firmly. "I hate what you've done to Mom, and by the way, we're demanding alimony. We have all the evidence we need." "You can't," Ryan protested. "We're already divorced. I don't owe her anything." "Actually, you're wrong," I said. "The law gives me 3 years to file for alimony in cases of adultery. It's only been a month since the divorce. I've got plenty of time." Ryan's shoulders slumped. "Oh no. We're done here," I said, standing up. "From now on, we'll handle this through a lawyer." Before we left, Mia turned to Ryan. "Dad, one last thing," she said. "What?" he asked. "You have no right to call Mom names like old hag. And honestly, you're an old fool to me. Stop acting like you're so important while treating people like dirt. If you act like this at work, I bet your colleagues hate you just as much as I do." Ryan sat there speechless as Mia and I walked out together, leaving him to face the consequences of his actions. Mia didn't hold back as she fired back at Jack with everything on her mind. Jack just sat there, shocked. He was speechless, his face turning pale as tears welled up in his eyes. Mia and I didn't even say goodbye. We just left the cafe together, walking out of his life for good. After that, we headed straight to confront the woman Jack had been seeing. We met her at another cafe. When Mia and I arrived, she was already sitting there, smoking a cigarette, waiting for us. "What do you want from me?" she asked in a snarky tone. "I want you to pay alimony because you're involved with my ex-husband," I said calmly. She scoffed. "What alimony? I didn't start seeing him until after he was single. That's not cheating." I pulled out the same evidence I had shown Jack. "This proves you were having an affair with him while we were still married. My lawyer says I'm entitled to alimony." She rolled her eyes. "You're divorced now. You can't get alimony anymore. You're an idiot." "Just like my ex," I shot back. "Seems like you two have a lot in common." "Who are you calling an idiot? You old hag?" she snapped. I wasn't going to back down. "That's what my ex used to call me. He thought it would hurt me, but it didn't." She sneered. "What's the point of dating an old woman like you? You're just covering your age with all that makeup." Mia cut in, her voice full of anger. "Who do you think you are? You're just as old as my mom, and you're a part-timer, right? I'd rather have a mom who's been working a full-time job in a position way above your level. She's more independent and respectable than you'll ever be." The woman was stammering now. "Wait, I wasn't making fun of you for—" Life has a funny way of revealing the truth about people, especially when there's money involved. I never thought my own sister would try to legally declare me dead, but I guess $12 million can make people do crazy things. I'm Emma Chen, 29 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew everything about my life. I was raised by my mom, Lisa Chen. after my father supposedly abandoned us before I was born. My half-sister, Rachel, came along when Mom remarried Jack Wilson when I was 4. We grew up in a modest home in Boston, and while we weren't poor, Mom always emphasized the importance of education and hard work. What none of us knew was that my biological father, David Thompson, had been searching for us for years. Mom had disappeared while pregnant with me, thinking she was protecting us from what she believed was his controlling family. The truth, as I would later learn, was far more complicated. But let me start with the day everything changed. I'd spent the last 5 years building my photography career, traveling to remote corners of the world capturing images for National Geographic and other major publications. My latest assignment took me to the Himalayan mountains, documenting traditional villages that were adapting to climate change. It was challenging work, no reliable phone service, spotty internet at best, and days of hiking between locations. Rachel had always been jealous of my glamorous career, though she never understood the countless nights I spent sleeping on frozen ground or the years of unpaid internships it took to get here. She chose a different path, working as a real estate agent and marrying Tham, a struggling day trader with expensive tastes. The last time I spoke to Mom was 3 months into my assignment. She sounded strange on our satellite phone call, emotional but trying to hide it. "Emma, honey," she said, her voice crackling through the poor connection. "There's something important I need to tell you when you get back. Something about your father." "Mom, you're breaking up," I replied, struggling to hear her through the static. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, just come home soon. I love you." Those were her last words to me. 2 weeks later, while I was in a remote village with no communication, Mom had a sudden heart attack. By the time I made it back to civilization and checked my messages, she had been gone for 10 days. I immediately began the long journey home, but travel from remote Nepal isn't simple. Delayed flights, missed connections, and monsoon weather stretched my return into a 3-week ordeal. What I didn't know was that Rachel had already set her plan in motion. You see, 6 months before Mom's death, she'd received a letter from a prestigious law firm. My biological father, David Thompson, had finally tracked us down. He was a federal judge now and had never stopped looking for us. More importantly, he'd recently been diagnosed with terminal cancer and wanted to make things right. He'd set up a trust fund for me, $12 million, plus properties in 3 states. Mom had been processing this information, trying to figure out how to tell me the truth about my father when she passed away. Rachel found the letter while going through Mom's papers. And that's when she saw her opportunity. While I was desperately trying to get home, Rachel was convincing everyone that I had died in a hiking accident in Nepal. She used her real estate connections to create false documentation, took advantage of the language barrier and poor communication with local authorities, and even held a memorial service with an empty casket. My poor sister, she'd sobbed to the mourners. At least she died doing what she loved. By the time I finally made it back to Boston, Rachel had already filed papers to claim the inheritance as my only surviving sibling. She even moved into one of the properties left in the trust. I'll never forget the moment I walked into my childhood home. Rachel was sitting in the living room with Tom, surrounded by papers from the law firm, when I opened the door with my key. The color drained from her face as if she'd seen a ghost, which in her mind she had. Emma," she stammered, dropping her coffee mug. It shattered on the hardwood floor Mom had been so proud of. You're supposed to be dead." I finished for her, setting down my weathered backpack. "Funny thing about that, I'm very much alive." Tom bolted from the room, nearly tripping over his own feet. Rachel's shock quickly turned to calculation. I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she tried to figure out how to spin this. "Emma, thank God." She jumped up, arms open for a hug I didn't return. "We thought there was a report from Nepal. We were devastated. I've been trying to handle all the legal matters for you to protect your interests." "Really?" I pulled out my phone, showing her the emails I discovered on Mom's computer. "Is that why you told the law firm I died in a climbing accident? Why you've been trying to claim my inheritance?" "I can explain," she sputtered. "It's not what you think." But I wasn't interested in her explanations. I'd spent the flight home doing my research, making calls, and uncovering every detail of her scheme. What I discovered wasn't just fraud, it was a calculated plan that had started even before Mom's death. What Rachel didn't know, what none of us had known, was that I wasn't the only one who had inherited my biological father's methodical nature and attention to detail, and I was about to show my dear sister exactly what that meant. "Pack your bags," I said calmly, pulling out a formal-looking document. "You have 24 hours to vacate this property, and Rachel, don't bother trying to run. The FBI is already investigating the false death reports you filed." She lunged for the document in my hand, but I stepped back. "You can't prove anything. It was a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect our family's interests." I smiled, thinking of the meeting I had scheduled for the next morning. "Actually, I can prove everything. And you're about to learn exactly who you've been trying to steal from." What happened next would shake our family to its core, expose decades of secrets, and lead to a courtroom confrontation that nobody saw coming. But that's where the real story begins. The next morning, I walked into the federal courthouse in downtown Boston, my heart pounding but my steps steady. Rachel had spent the night calling everyone she knew, trying to find a lawyer willing to defend her misunderstanding. She'd even tried convincing our stepdad, Jack, to reason with me. "Emma, please," he'd begged over the phone. "Rachel made a mistake, but she's still your sister." "No, Jack," I'd replied firmly. "A mistake is accidentally damaging someone's car." She tried to legally declare me dead. What Rachel didn't know was that I'd already been in contact with Judge David Thompson's office. When I couldn't reach Mom during my trip, I finally opened that email I'd been avoiding. The one from the law firm explaining my father's search for me. After confirming Mom's death, I'd reached out to them. The security guard at the courthouse entrance did a double take when he checked my ID. "Miss Chen, or should I say Miss Thompson?" he said with a knowing smile. "You look just like your father." I was directed to a private chamber where a tall, distinguished-looking man in his early 60s stood looking out the window. He turned as I entered, and I felt my breath catch. It was like looking at an older, male version of myself. We had the same sharp green eyes, the same way of tilting our heads when studying something. "Emma," he breathed, taking a step forward but stopping himself. "I've waited so long." Tears filled my eyes. "Why didn't you find us sooner?" "I tried. God, I tried." He sank into a leather chair, gesturing for me to sit. "Your mother. Lisa was trying to protect you, my family back then. My father, he was a controlling man. Lisa thought he'd try to take you away from her, raise you as the proper Thompson here. She didn't know he was dying, that things were about to change." For the next hour, he filled in the gaps of my history. How he'd hired private investigators, how he'd finally reformed his family's old money attitudes as he rose through the legal ranks, how finding that first photo of me in National Geographic had given him hope. "When I got sick," he continued, "I knew I had to move faster. The inheritance was never about the money. It was about giving you the security I should have provided all along." A knock at the door interrupted us. "Judge Thompson." "They're ready." He squeezed my hand. "Ready to face your sister?" I nodded. "More than ready." The courtroom was packed. News of a federal judge's long-lost daughter and attempted inheritance fraud had spread quickly. Rachel sat at the defendant's table, wearing her most modest black dress, clearly going for a grieving sister image. Her expensive lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. Then my father took the bench and everything changed. Rachel's face went from practiced sorrow to shock as she looked between Judge Thompson and me, finally seeing the obvious resemblance. Her lawyer's whispers became more frantic. "This emergency hearing will address the fraudulent death declaration of Emma Chen, also known as Emma Thompson, and the attempted theft of her inheritance through false documentation," my father began, his voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench. Rachel's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we request you recuse yourself due to obvious conflict of interest." "Already arranged," my father replied calmly. "Judge Martinez will be here momentarily to proceed. I simply wanted to be present for this opening statement." He turned to Rachel, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "Ms. Wilson, when you attempted to have your sister declared dead, did you ever wonder why a federal judge would leave such a substantial inheritance to a photographer he'd never met?" Rachel's carefully constructed facade cracked. I didn't." "No, you didn't think," he continued. "You saw an opportunity and took it, never questioning why I would track down your sister after 29 years. Never wondering why we have the same eyes, the same expressions. Never considering that I trying to steal from her, you were attempting to defraud a federal judge's daughter." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Rachel's lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. Judge Martinez arrived and the real proceedings began. The evidence was overwhelming. Rachel had forged documents, bribed officials in Nepal, and even created fake death certificates. She'd planned it all while Mom was still alive, waiting for an opportunity. But the biggest shock came when Tham, Rachel's husband, took the stand. She started planning it months ago, he testified, avoiding Rachel's murderous glare. When she found out about Emma's real father being Judge Thompson, she became obsessed. Said it wasn't fair that Emma got everything just for being born to the right father. She even suggested we should adopt Emma's future share of Mom's estate since dead people can't inherit. I watched my sister crumble as her husband betrayed her, as her schemes were exposed one by one. The woman who'd once been my childhood playmate, who borrowed my clothes and shared my secrets, was revealed as a stranger. The judge's verdict was swift and severe. Rachel was facing criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and filing false reports. She'd have to repay all the money she'd spent from the properties she'd illegally occupied. Her real estate license was suspended pending further investigation. But it was our stepfather's words in the hallway afterward that truly ended things. "Your mother," Jack said, tears in his eyes. "She wanted to tell you about Judge Thompson for years. She was so proud of you, Emma." Rachel, she knew that. She knew and still chose to do this. I can't defend her anymore." Rachel was led away in handcuffs, sobbing not from remorse, but from being caught. As she passed me, she hissed, "You think you're better than me now? With your fancy real father and millions?" I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and felt only pity. "I was never competing with you, Rachel. You were the only one keeping score." The aftermath changed everything. Judge Thompson, Dad, and I began the slow process of building a relationship. He retired from the bench to focus on his health and making up for lost time. The treatments were working better than expected, giving us precious months to connect. I kept my photography career but established a foundation in Mom's name, providing scholarships for young photographers from underprivileged backgrounds. One of Dad's properties became a gallery showcasing their work. Rachel was sentenced to 5 years in prison for her crimes. Tom filed for divorce and cooperated with authorities in exchange for leniency. Jack visits her sometimes, but our family will never be the same. Last week, I found an old photo album in Mom's things. There was a picture of Rachel and me as kids, grinning with ice cream-covered faces, genuinely happy in each other's company. I thought about showing it to her during visiting hours, but decided against it. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. But other things, like my newfound relationship with my father, prove that it's never too late for a new beginning. Dad and I often sit in his study, sharing stories and making up for lost time. "You know," he said recently, "your mother was right to be worried about my family back then. But she was wrong about one thing. Running away didn't prevent you from becoming a Thompson. You've got our spirit, our sense of justice." I smiled, thinking of the long road that led us here. Maybe sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who you really are. And who am I? I'm Emma Chin Thompson, daughter of a mother who protected me and a father who never stopped searching. I'm a photographer who captures truth through my lens and a woman who learned that real family isn't about blood or money, it's about choice. As for Rachel, I heard she's writing a memoir in prison about family betrayal. I wish her well, but some stories don't need to be rewritten. Sometimes the truth is enough. Turning 16 was the day my world shattered, then began to rebuild. The rain lashed against the windows of our suburban house, its relentless rhythm mirroring the storm inside. Victoria, my sister, leaned casually in the corner, her lips curling into a smirk as our parents delivered the devastating news. "Rachel," Mom began, her voice devoid of warmth, "we've decided it's time for you to leave." She said it as though announcing a minor inconvenience, not exiling her own daughter. "You're not like Victoria. You're not college material, and we can't keep wasting resources on a lost cause." Dad remained hidden behind his newspaper, as detached as ever. Meanwhile, Victoria stepped forward, the sharp click of her designer heels punctuating the silence. Don't take it too hard, little sister, she cooed, her fox sympathy unmistakable. Maybe you'll find work as a janitor. That seems more your speed. I stood frozen, my backpack clutched tightly, trying to comprehend their cruelty. The signs had been there all along. Forgotten birthdays, constant comparisons, and praise heaped on Victoria while my efforts went unnoticed. But this was beyond anything I had imagined. Victoria had always been their golden child, their prodigy. While she enjoyed private tutoring and elite dance classes, I scraped by, funding my own school supplies with part-time jobs. Even when I earned a B average despite the odds, the only response was, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" "You have until tonight to pack," Mom added coldly. "And don't take anything we bought. Those are family assets." I laughed bitterly. "That won't be an issue. I've bought everything I owned since I was 12. Victoria rolled her eyes. "Always the victim, Rachel. This is why you'll never amount to anything." That night, packing my few belongings into a battered duffel bag, I vowed to prove them wrong. Not just wrong, I would succeed so spectacularly that their betrayal would haunt them forever. What they didn't know was that I'd spent the past year secretly learning to code. Every dollar I earned working at the cafe went toward online courses. My high school computer science teacher, Mrs. Chen, had seen my potential and quietly mentored me. While Victoria flaunted her Princeton acceptance, I was building a future they couldn't imagine. Instead of wandering the streets as my family probably hoped, I showed up on Mrs. Chen's doorstep. "Rachel," she exclaimed, pulling me into a warm hug. "Come in, you're safe here." The Chens welcomed me like family, their modest home becoming my sanctuary. Mrs. Chen nurtured my talent, while her husband James, who worked in tech recruitment, helped me secure an internship. From there, I poured every ounce of myself into learning, coding, and growing. By 18, I launched my first successful app, an educational platform for underprivileged students. Its impact caught the attention of TechFusion's CEO, Marcus Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, who offered me a role on their development team. By 26, I had become one of TechFusion's youngest executive vice presidents, managing billion-dollar projects. My achievements were public, but my name, legally changed to Rachel Chen, ensured my family remained unaware of my success. Meanwhile, Victoria followed the predictable path: law school, a prestigious firm, and a marriage to Bradley Thompson, a lawyer from old money. Mom and Dad filled their social media with her picture-perfect life, blissfully ignorant of mine. Then, fate intervened. One routine day at work, my assistant buzzed in. "Ms. Chen, the representatives for the merger meeting are here. They're from Thompson, Williams & Associates." My heart skipped a beat. Victoria's firm. "Send them in," I said, adjusting my designer suit and settling into my office chair. The door opened and there she was, Victoria, poised and polished, followed by Bradley and their colleagues. The moment her eyes met mine, her expression faltered. Her Hermes bag slipped from her hand, hitting the floor. "Rachel?" she whispered, stunned. "How?" I smiled coolly. "Welcome to TechFusion. Shall we discuss the merger?" Victoria's composure crumbled as realization dawned. Her nothing of a sister sat in a corner office towering over the city, commanding a power she never dreamed I could hold. "This can't be real," she stammered. You're not supposed to be here." I leaned back, the weight of my triumph speaking louder than words. "Well, Victoria, I'm here. So shall we begin?" Bradley cleared his throat, attempting professionalism. "Ms. Chen, we weren't aware of your connection to Victoria." I let the moment linger, savoring the sweet taste of vindication. "No, I'm sure you weren't aware," I replied, my voice calm and sharp. "Just like you probably didn't realize your firm's future rests entirely on my recommendation regarding this merger." Victoria's face, already pale, turned ghostly white. The weight of my words settled on her like an avalanche. 10 years ago, she had laughed as our parents cast me out. Now the life she built on superiority and control was dangling by a thread, and I held the scissors. The meeting that followed was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Watching Victoria squirm under the weight of her crumbling facade felt like justice, but this was just the beginning. She had no idea what was coming next, and neither did our parents. Revenge, like success, is best served with careful planning and perfect timing. As Victoria and her team left my office, I saw the cracks forming in her once impenetrable confidence. Everything she thought she knew about herself, her power, her superiority, was unraveling in real time. This was just part one of a decade-long plan. The real blow was yet to come. News of the meeting spread quickly through her circles. Within days, whispers of my identity replaced the reverent mentions of her accomplishments. Rachel Chen, the tech genius, the prodigy on magazine covers, the self-made millionaire, was no longer just a name in the tech world. To Victoria, I was the sister she had dismissed and discarded. My phone buzzed relentlessly with calls and messages from her. 17 missed calls in a single day. Each one was a small victory, a stark reminder of the countless times my family had ignored me. Ms. Chen, my assistant Sarah's voice came through the intercom. "Your sister is in the lobby again. She's insisting on seeing you." I glanced at my Rolex, a symbol of how far I'd come from that 16-year-old girl in thrifted clothes. "Let her wait," I replied smoothly. "I have more pressing matters to attend to." Those pressing matters included signing the final paperwork for Tech Fusion's acquisition of Thomson Williams and Associates. But not through the merger they desperately sought. This was a hostile takeover, a decisive end to their firm as they knew it. An hour later, Victoria burst into my office. Her once flawless appearance was in shambles. Her suit wrinkled, her mascara streaked from tears. "Rachel, please," she began, her voice trembling. "You have to talk to me. The merger, our firm depends on it." I leaned back in my chair, letting the moment stretch. "Interesting. Now you need something from me. Quite the change from 10 years ago, isn't it?" "I was young," she protested weakly, desperation etched into her features. "We all were." I didn't understand. "Didn't understand what?" I interrupted, my tone icy. "That treating your own sister like garbage might come back to haunt you. That the person you threw away might actually amount to something." She sank into the chair opposite me, the weight of her guilt pulling her down. "What do you want, Rachel? An apology? Money? Just tell me." I laughed, a sound as bitter as it was triumphant. "Money? Victoria, I make more in a month than you do in a year. And as for an apology," I rose from my chair and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "It's far too late for that. Mom and Dad want to see you," she whispered. "They're devastated they didn't know about your success." "Devastated they missed out on the money, you mean?" I replied, not bothering to mask my disdain. "Tell me, did they ever look for me after throwing me out? Did any of you?" Her silence was answer enough. "Mrs. Chen looked for me," I continued, my voice steady with resolve. "She and her husband gave me a home, believed in me, and supported my dreams. They're my real family." Victoria's eyes widened in realization. He changed your name to Chen." "I did," I said simply. "The moment I turned 18. I wanted nothing to do with a name that brought me nothing but pain." Just then, my phone buzzed. A message from Marcus Chen, Tech Fusion's CEO. "Acquisition approved by the board. Proceed as planned." I turned back to Victoria, my expression unreadable. "You'll be getting some interesting news about your firm soon. I suggest you update your resume." Her panic was palpable. "What do you mean?" I savored the moment before delivering the blow. "Tech Fusion isn't merging with Thomson, Williams and Associates," I said, each word deliberate. "We're buying it, and our first order of business is restructuring the management team." The blood drained from her face as the implications sank in. "You can't do this. Bradley's family, their connections." I laughed outright this time. "Bradley's country club connections? Victoria, I have dinner with senators and tech billionaires. His world is nothing compared to mine." As if on cue, her phone buzzed. Bradley's name lit up the screen. The news was spreading like wildfire. "This isn't just about me," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Think about the employees, their families." "Don't lecture me about caring for others," I said sharply. "Unlike our parents, I don't punish innocent people for someone else's mistakes. The employees will be taken care of, but the senior partners who perpetuated that toxic culture, they're out." She stood shakily, her entire world collapsing around her. "Mom and Dad will be at my house tonight," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They want to make things right." I paused, considering her words. Seeing them grovel might be amusing, but I had a better idea. "Tell them to come to the Capitol tomorrow night at 8. I'll reserve a private room." After she left, I called Mrs. Chen. "They took the bait," I said, satisfaction evident in my tone. "Are you sure about this, Rachel?" she asked gently. Revenge can feel hollow in the end. This isn't just revenge, I assured her. This is justice. And tomorrow, they'll finally understand what that means. The next evening, I sat in the capital's most exclusive dining room, the pinnacle of luxury. When my family arrived, their expressions were a mix of awe and discomfort. The daughter they discarded now commanded a world they could only dream of entering. Rachel, Mom began, stepping forward as if to hug me. I didn't move. Please, I said coldly, gesturing to the table. Sit. Dad cleared his throat, clearly out of his depth. We've been doing a lot of thinking, Princess. Don't, I interrupted. You lost the right to call me that the day you threw me out. Mom's eyes filled with tears, perfectly timed as always. We made a mistake, she sobbed. We were so wrong about you. The waiter approached, presenting a bottle of wine worth more than their monthly mortgage payment. I gestured for it to be poured, the sound of the cork popping slicing through the tense air. Yes, you were wrong, I said, my tone calm but unyielding. But that's not why I agreed to this dinner. Victoria shifted in her seat, her confidence unraveling. Rachel, about the firm. The acquisition is final, I replied sharply. And again, that's not why we're here. From my briefcase, I withdrew 3 folders and slid one to each of them. Open them. The silence thickened as they complied. Inside each folder were meticulously documented records, a timeline of their cruelty, from forgotten birthdays to scathing remarks, juxtaposed with financial statements, property deeds, and investment portfolios, all of it theirs. How did you get this? Dad's voice faltered as his eyes darted over the damning contents. While you were busy boasting about Victoria's mediocre achievements, I began leaning back in my chair. I was busy acquiring every debt you owed. Your mortgage, car loans, Victoria's student loans, even Dad's failing business liabilities. I own it all. Every penny you owe is now mine. The shock was palpable. Mom's hands trembled as she clutched the folder, her perfectly manicured nails denting the expensive paper. Now, I said, taking a measured sip of the wine, we're going to discuss terms. The private dining room fell into an uneasy silence. For once, they were at a loss for words. Dad, the man who once dismissed me with a sneer, finally spoke, his voice barely audible. What do you want? What I want, I said, leaning forward, is for you to understand what you threw away 10 years ago. Not just a daughter, but someone who could have been your greatest ally. Mom dabbed at her tears, her designer mascara smudging in streaks. We can be a family again, she whispered, her voice breaking. Please, Rachel, we'll do anything. Anything. I raised an eyebrow, pulling out another set of papers. Then sign this. Victoria, ever the lawyer, grabbed the document first. Her face paled as she read it. This is everything. The house, Dad's business, my trust fund. Precisely, I said coolly. Sign it all over to me and I'll erase your debts. Refuse and tomorrow, I'll foreclose on everything. You can't do this, Dad protested, his voice tinged with desperation. We'll be ruined. Ruined, I echoed, a cold laugh escaping my lips. Let me tell you about ruined. Ruined is being 16 and sleeping in a park because your family threw you out. Ruined is working 3 jobs just to afford a meal. Ruined is watching the sister who mocked you post about her perfect life while you fight to survive. Victoria's anger flared. You're better than this, Rachel. You've already won. You're wealthy, powerful. Why stoop to our level? This isn't about stooping, I said, my voice steady. This is about justice. Consequences. From my phone, I played a recording. Their voices from a decade ago filled the room, cutting through their veneer of remorse. Sneers, dismissive laughter, cruel words predicting my failure. Mom covered her mouth as if to block out the sound of her own venom. I kept this, I said quietly, pausing the recording. Every time I felt like giving up, it reminded me what I was working for. Not just success. This moment. Dad's hands trembled as he picked up the pen and signed the papers. Mom followed, her tears falling freely. Victoria hesitated, her pride warring with her fear, but eventually she signed as well. It's done, I said, collecting the documents. The apartment keys are with the maitre d'. You have until tomorrow to move your essentials. Everything else will be sold. As they stood to leave, I delivered my final blow. 10 years ago, you told me I'd never amount to anything. You were wrong. I became everything you said I couldn't, not because of you, but in spite of you. Victoria paused at the door, her voice fragile. Will we ever see you again? I considered her question. That depends on whether you learn from this. After they left, Mrs. Chen entered the room, her warm smile a balm to my hardened exterior. She hugged me tightly. Are you okay, sweetheart? For the first time in 10 years, I said, my voice lighter. I think I am. The next morning, I watched movers dismantle my old family home. Piece by piece, Victoria's perfect life unraveled. Dad's business was already undergoing restructuring, and Mom's social circle buzzed with the scandal of their fall from grace. But revenge wasn't my ultimate goal. I had something bigger in mind. The following week, I announced the creation of the Chen Foundation for Youth Empowerment. Its mission, to support abandoned and struggling teens, giving them the tools to rewrite their own stories. When I unveiled the foundation headquarters to Mrs. Chen, she cried. This, she said, her voice thick with pride, is your real victory, turning pain into purpose. She was right. The legacy I was building wasn't born from vengeance, but from hope. Each teenager who walked through the foundation's doors would find the support I once needed and received from the Chens. Months later, a letter arrived from Victoria. She wrote about her new life, working as a paralegal, living in a modest apartment, and finally understanding the value of humility. I didn't respond. Instead, I anonymously donated to the legal aid clinic where she worked, ensuring they could continue helping others. Success, I realized, wasn't just about proving my family wrong. It was about proving to myself that resilience could triumph over cruelty. My biological family may have abandoned me, but their rejection had forged me into someone unstoppable. Someone who not only survived but thrived and used that success to lift others. In the end, I had gained something far more valuable than revenge. I had found freedom, purpose, and an unshakable peace. The girl they threw away had become the woman they could never be, happy, fulfilled, and whole. I'm really sorry. It's okay, take your time and tell me slowly, I said gently as my niece fought back tears. Despite her distress, I encouraged her softly, trying to offer comfort. Before she could say anything more, she pulled an audio recording from her pocket and played it. I was stunned by the voice I heard, cursing my own ignorance. The situation was far more tragic and difficult than I had realized. Overwhelmed by the revelation, I broke down in tears and steeled myself for what was to come. Let me introduce myself. I'm Kathy. I work at an IT company where I hold a responsible position and earn a decent living. Although I could afford to live on my own, I stay with my parents since my workplace is close by and I can work remotely. I contribute financially to the household, and my parents prefer my company as they would otherwise feel lonely. I have an older sister who is 2 years my senior. She used to be happily married to a kind man, and they had a daughter named Susan. However, her husband passed away from an illness 3 years ago. At his funeral, I saw how exhausted my sister was and suggested, why don't you come back home until things settle down? You have Susan to think about too. Thank you for worrying, Kathy, but I'll be fine, she replied. She refused to return home, and though I found it odd, I attributed it to her strong-willed nature and her reluctance to lean on our parents. She continued working and raising Susan as a single mother. Despite the increasing burden, she assured me she was managing. A year ago, my sister fell ill and passed away. We took Susan, who was still in elementary school, into our home. Since moving in with us, Susan seemed unusually withdrawn. I remembered her as a lively and cheerful girl when her parents were alive, and I knew losing both parents so quickly must have been a heavy blow. I wanted to help her regain her spark. My parents tried talking to her, but she remained unresponsive. I suggested outings on my days off, but she showed no interest. Not wanting to push her too hard, I held back. 3 months later, Susan suddenly started apologizing, crying when my parents weren't around. Kathy, I'm sorry, she said, tears streaming down her face. What happened? Did something bother you? I asked, confused. No, it's not that. I'm just sorry, she repeated, her tears a complete surprise to me. She wouldn't explain why she was crying, only apologizing. and she always managed to keep it hidden from my parents. This only fueled my curiosity further. Another puzzling issue was my parents' frequent trips over the past few years. While occasional travel was fine, I couldn't understand how they could afford it on my contributions and their modest pensions. My father had been a manager at a small company and after retiring hadn't worked. My mother had been a housewife. Despite my efforts to manage most of the household chores, they seemed to be spending more than they should. Mom, Dad, it's okay to travel sometimes, but please save some money. You don't need to keep saying you're careful with your spending. I've worked hard for you all these years, and we don't have much time left, I said, trying to be considerate. Stop meddling in our affairs. We just want to enjoy ourselves, they retorted. I was exasperated. Whenever they went on trips, Susan seemed like she wanted to share something but never did. I decided to wait until she was ready to talk. A few months later, my father approached me, looking pleased. Kathy, he said, your mother and I are going on a week-long overseas trip soon. An overseas trip? How can you afford it? I just told you to save money. I protested. We came into a bit of money, my father replied dismissively. From where? I asked, but he waved my question away. Does it matter? We want to make some memories in our old age. Your mother and I deserve this experience. All right, fine, I said, though I couldn't shake the suspicion about their sudden windfall. I decided not to push further, thinking it was their money after all. Take care of things at home while we're gone, they instructed. Got it. Have a safe trip, I replied, trying to mask my concern. On the day of their trip, my parents left cheerfully, promising to bring back souvenirs. After seeing them off, I turned back to the living room and found my niece, Susan, standing there, looking as if she were on the verge of tears. Recognizing that something needed to be done, I decided to confront her. Susan, what's the matter? Your grandparents have left for their trip. It's just the two of us now. Please take your time and tell me what's wrong. I'm sorry, she said, beginning to cry again. I gently urged her to open up. Actually, she said, pulling out her smartphone and pressing play, I need to show you something. The recording that played was filled with my parents' angry voices. I was stunned. No matter how I listened, it was unmistakably their voices, though they had never spoken to me like this before. Is this really Grandpa and Grandma? I asked, incredulous. Yes, Susan confirmed, her voice trembling. They often came over when my parents were still alive. They used to nag and complain a lot, especially about my parents' marriage and making irrational demands for money, claiming it was compensation for taking their daughter away. I was horrified. I had no idea they were like that. I thought they were just visiting to see their granddaughter. Susan continued. They would threaten my parents under the guise of visits, extorting money every time they came. I would hide in my room whenever they were here because they were always yelling at my parents. I see, I said, feeling a pang of guilt. That must have been really tough. But how did you manage to record this? Susan explained that she had been given an old smartphone of her parents as a toy, and she happened to use it during one of those visits, capturing their angry outbursts. I was grateful for her bravery in recording this evidence. How often did they come to your house? I asked, the question that had been bothering me. I think it was almost every week, Susan replied. To think they visited my sister's family so frequently without my knowledge was shocking. In hindsight, I remembered how my sister and her husband had appeared increasingly haggard each time I saw them. When I asked my sister if she was okay, she had said they were just dieting together, which I had taken at face value. But now I realized that the strain from my parents' demands must have been wearing them down. I cursed myself for not probing further. If I had noticed the signs sooner, this might not have happened. I'm sorry for keeping it hidden, Susan said through her tears. I was scared of what Grandpa and Grandma might do if I told you. I should have been more aware, I said, holding her close. I'll protect you from now on. But what if they come after you too? Susan asked, her voice trembling. Don't worry about me, I reassured her. I won't let them win. We'll face this together. Yes, if I'm with you, I'm not scared, Susan said, determination in her eyes. Seeing her resolve, I nodded. During the week my parents were away, Susan and I prepared. With her support, I felt even more determined. I remembered how frugal my sister and her husband had been. My sister had once told me they rarely carried cash, preferring bank transfers. If they had given money to my parents, it would have been through these transfers. I searched the house and eventually found what I was looking for. I discovered my parents' bank passbook, revealing the frequent deposits they received from my sister and her husband. It was clear they had been living frugally to cover these payments. Ripping the passbook, I trembled with anger. I decided to take it to a private investigator to uncover the full extent of my parents' dealings. A few days later, I was summoned to the investigator's office. "Here is the report," the investigator said, handing me a folder. As I read through the report, my shock and anger deepened. It detailed how my brother-in-law had been borrowing money from financial institutions to pay my parents, which led to his mental exhaustion and eventual death. My sister had worked herself to the brink trying to repay these debts and meet my parents' constant demands. Additionally, my parents had mistreated Susan, claiming they were doing her a favor by letting her stay with them. The revelation was devastating. I started to cry, feeling a profound sense of betrayal. How could they do this without me knowing? I wondered aloud. Furthermore, the report revealed that my parents had even taken my brother-in-law's insurance money. "You can't be serious," I said as I reviewed the additional documents confirming this. "They must have used that money for their frequent trips." I thanked the investigator and returned home, determined to address this betrayal. Until my parents came back from their overseas trip, Susan and I finalized our plan. "Do you think we can pull this off?" I asked Susan. "Don't worry," she said confidently. "We still have time. Let's practice as much as we need." "I'll do my best," I promised. We rehearsed our plan until Susan felt confident. A few days later, we were ready and waited for my parents to return. We had set up cameras around the house to capture everything on video and audio as evidence. I had discussed this with my lawyer and received approval. When my parents finally came home, they were full of excitement. "We're home. Did you have a good time?" I asked. "Yes, it was great. We brought lots of souvenirs." "Where's Susan?" they replied. "She's doing her homework in her room." "You must be tired from your trip, so why don't you rest for a bit?" I suggested. "That sounds good. How about some tea?" my mother asked. "I'll make it," I offered. "No, let me," my mother insisted. "I always make your father's tea." "All right, understood," I said, preparing to carry out the next steps of our plan. My parents seemed to have enjoyed their trip immensely, regaling me with stories when I returned. "Oh, sorry, I need to step out for a bit," I said, taking an urgent work call. "It happens sometimes. I'll be back soon." "Take care," they responded, still buzzing from their travels. Once I was sure they had relaxed, I excused myself, signaling the start of our plan. After leaving the house, I called Susan. "Hey, Susan, I've left the house." "Got it," she replied, keeping our call connected as she went to confront my parents. "Oh, welcome back," my parents greeted Susan. "We brought back lots of souvenirs." "Thank you," Susan said, "but I need to talk to you." "What is it? Speak up." Following my father's directive, Susan played the recorded audio. The shock on my parents' faces was immediate. "Where did you get that?" my father demanded. "Susan, be a good girl and give that to me." My parents were visibly panicked. "I was planning to let Kathy hear this," Susan said. "Please don't do that," my mother pleaded. "Do you know what will happen if you do?" "But this isn't right," Susan countered. "We took you in when you had nowhere else to go, so you should listen to us." "Yes, if it weren't for us, you wouldn't be getting any welfare benefits," my father added. "Then why are you kind to Kathy?" Susan pressed. My parents' anger flared. "We're nice to her because she brings money into the house," they admitted. "We're living off your father's pension now, so if Kathy leaves, we'll be in trouble." "That's right," my mother continued. "As long as she's around, she'll always give us money when we need it. She's a convenient fool." Hearing their true feelings was devastating. My anger reached its peak. I stormed back home, my mind racing. Bursting through the door, I shouted, "Oh, so this is how you really feel about me? You see me as nothing more than a cash cow and a housekeeper." "Of course we're not working anymore," my father shot back. "How else are we supposed to live on just a pension?" "That's right," my mother chimed in. "We need your help to survive." They didn't deny their actions and shamelessly demanded more money. The thought of staying in this house under these conditions made me sick. "If that's how you feel, I won't give you any more money," I said. "I'm taking Susan and we're leaving. Don't contact us again." "How will we live without you?" they protested. "I know everything," I said. "I know you took money from my sister and brother-in-law." What are you talking about? My father asked, feigning ignorance. Did Susan tell you? My mother inquired. Yes, she did, I confirmed. We have all the evidence, so don't bother arguing. Susan went to pack her things, and I took her hand when she returned. We left the house and stayed at a hotel near my workplace, which I had arranged beforehand. A few days later, I found a new place for us to live. Shortly after we moved in, I received a call from the police. Is it true? I asked, bewildered. Yes, the officer confirmed. Your parents have been arrested for shoplifting. No way, I said, unable to believe it. I was only gone a few days. How could they have run out of money so quickly? Besides, they were getting welfare benefits for taking care of Susan. Reluctantly, I went to the police station. My parents, looking repentant, apologized. We just made a mistake, they said. I took them back to the house. The utilities, electricity, gas, and water had been cut off, and the house was in a terrible state. It reeked of filth, a testament to my mother's poor housekeeping. How did everything get cut off? Were you that broke? I asked, appalled. And what's with this mess? Of course we're broke, my father said. We were enjoying our retirement, but we can't manage housework anymore. You took Susan, so we stopped getting welfare. My pension isn't enough. If you had kept giving us money, we wouldn't have had to steal, my mother said bitterly. They angrily blamed me for their situation. I sighed in exasperation. This is your own fault. How many times did I tell you to save money? Yet you kept going on week-long trips every few months. Enough of that, they snapped. Just give us the money to pay for the utilities. We can't live here without them, and get a cleaning service. This place is uninhabitable. Their demands were relentless, and their blame shifted entirely onto me. I was beyond furious. I was simply fed up. All right, I said, my voice cold. You refuse to acknowledge your faults. In that case, I'm done. What? What are we supposed to acknowledge? My mother asked, bewildered. Fine, this is the last time I'll speak to you, I said. I'm cutting ties with you. Don't contact me again. I left the house, and a month later, it was vacant. The house, which was in my name, was sold, forcing my parents to leave. They had forgotten that detail. After some time, I went to apologize to the neighbors for any trouble caused. They informed me that loan sharks had been lurking around, indicating my parents had turned to them for money. Rumor had it they were seen in a park, looking disheveled. Eventually, I legally separated from my parents and adopted Susan as my daughter. Our bond grew stronger, and Susan's cheerful spirit returned. Our lives stabilized, and I vowed to continue watching over her and make my late sister proud. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video. Sarah Martinez smoothed down her simple blue dress as she walked into the Grand Plaza Hotel, her heart beating with anticipation. Today was her daughter Emma's wedding day, and despite everything, she couldn't help but smile. The lobby gleamed with marble and crystal, exactly the kind of venue her future son-in-law's family would choose. Mom. Emma's voice rang out across the lobby. Sarah turned to see her daughter, still in her regular clothes, hurrying toward her. You made it. But there was something tight about Emma's smile, a tension in her shoulders that Sarah recognized all too well. Of course I made it, sweetheart. I wouldn't miss your big day. Sarah reached out to hug her daughter, but Emma took a small step back, her eyes darting around the lobby. Mom, I need to tell you something, Emma began, wringing her hands. James's family, they've made some changes to the seating arrangements. Sarah's stomach tightened. She'd been expecting something like this ever since James's mother, Patricia Thompson, had taken over the wedding planning. What kind of changes? They've moved you to the back table, Emma said quickly, the words tumbling out. Near the kitchen entrance. Patricia says it's because of the photographer's setup. But she trailed off, unable to meet her mother's eyes. Before Sarah could respond, a sharp voice cut through their conversation. Emma, what are you doing down here? We need you in the bridal suite immediately. Patricia Thompson strode across the lobby, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor. Her eyes swept over Sarah with barely concealed disdain. Oh, you're here. Sarah straightened her spine. Hello, Patricia. The hotel looks lovely. Patricia's lips curved into a cold smile. Yes, well, we wanted everything to be perfect for James and Emma. Speaking of which, she turned to Emma. Darling, your hair appointment was scheduled for 10 minutes ago. You don't want to keep everyone waiting. Emma hesitated, looking between her mother and future mother-in-law. Mom, I'm sorry about. Go on, Sarah said gently. It's your day. Don't worry about me. As Emma hurried away, Patricia's facade dropped. Listen, she said, her voice low and cutting. I know Emma insisted on having you here, but let's be clear, you don't fit in with our crowd. The Thompsons have a certain reputation to maintain. Sarah kept her voice steady. I'm here for my daughter. Yes, and you can support her from the back of the room. We don't need your modest circumstances ruining the wedding photos. I'm sure you understand. Patricia's smile was sharp as glass. Oh, and we've arranged for the staff meals to be served at your table. It seemed appropriate. With that, Patricia turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing alone in the vast lobby. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of the humiliation. She thought about the extra shifts she'd picked up at the hospital, working as a nurse to help pay for Emma's education. About the nights she'd spent helping Emma study for her medical school entrance exams, proud beyond words when she'd been accepted. Now her daughter was marrying into the Thompson family, owners of the largest hospital network in the state, and suddenly Sarah's decades of hard work meant nothing. She found her way to the ballroom, where the wedding would take place in a few hours. The space was stunning. Crystal chandeliers caught the light, fresh flowers adorned every table, and a string quartet was setting up in the corner. But as she walked toward the back of the room, she saw it, her table, partially hidden behind a large pillar right next to the swinging kitchen doors. Mrs. Martinez? A young woman in hotel staff uniform approached her. I'm Jenny from Event Services. We were told you'd be seated here. Sarah nodded, noticing the sympathy in Jenny's eyes. That's right. The thing is, Jenny lowered her voice, glancing around. I wanted to let you know, while the staff here, we all know who you are. My sister was at County General last year when you worked that terrible 30-hour shift during the crisis. You saved her life. Sarah blinked in surprise. She remembered that night. A massive pileup on the highway had overwhelmed the hospital. She'd stayed long past her shift, working until she could barely stand. Jenny continued, we think it's wrong how they're treating you, and we wanted you to know, if you need anything, just ask. The whole staff is on your side. For a moment, Sarah stood there, processing Jenny's words. Then she remembered something that could change everything. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Actually, she said, a small smile playing at her lips, there is something you could help me with, but first, I need to make a call. As she dialed a familiar number, Sarah watched the Thompson family sweeping through the ballroom, directing staff and making demands. Patricia was at the center of it all, gesturing dramatically about some perceived flaw in the table settings. Hello, Marcus. It's Sarah Martinez. Remember that favor you owe me? I think it's time to cash it in. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity. Sarah watched from her corner as the ballroom filled with guests, all dressed in designer clothes and dripping with jewelry. She couldn't help but notice how the Thompson family greeted each arrival with elaborate embraces and air kisses, at least until they spotted her. Is that her? She overheard one woman whisper to Patricia, the mother who works as a nurse. Patricia's response was just loud enough to carry. Yes, unfortunately. But don't worry, we've managed to keep her out of sight. Can't have anything spoiling James's big day. Sarah checked her watch. Any minute now. The first sign that something was wrong came when Jenny and 3 other servers suddenly removed their uniforms, revealing street clothes underneath. They walked straight through the middle of the ballroom and toward the exit. Where are you going? Patricia called out, her voice sharp. We haven't even served the appetizers. Jenny turned, her head held high. We quit. Before Patricia could respond, more staff members began following suit. The bartenders packed up their tools. The valet parking attendants walked off their posts. Even the wedding coordinator closed her laptop and headed for the door. What is the meaning of this? Patricia's face had turned an interesting shade of red. You can't just leave. We have a contract. Actually, a deep voice said from the doorway, they can. Marcus Chen, CEO of the hotel chain, walked into the ballroom. His presence commanded immediate attention, and Sarah had to suppress a smile as she watched Patricia's expression shift from anger to confusion to desperate charm. "Mr. Chen." Patricia hurried forward. "There must be some mistake. We booked this venue months ago, and now your staff is following my direct orders," Marcus finished for her. He turned to address the crowded room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize, but the Grand Plaza will not be able to host this event today. All staff have been instructed to cease operations immediately." The ballroom erupted in chaos. Guests began murmuring. James's father was shouting about lawyers, and Emma, poor Emma, looked like she might faint. "Mom," Emma made her way through the crowd to Sarah's side. "What's happening?" Before Sarah could answer, Marcus spotted her and smiled warmly. "Sarah, there you are." Patricia's head whipped around so fast Sarah worried she might hurt herself. You know each other." "Know each other?" Marcus laughed. "Sarah Martinez saved my daughter's life last year. Spotted a rare condition that every other doctor had missed. Stayed with her through the night, monitoring her personally." He turned to Sarah. "I told you then. Anything you need, anytime." "I meant it." The pieces were starting to fall into place for the guests. Sarah could see the dawning horror on Patricia's face as she realized her mistake. "But more than that," Marcus continued, his voice carrying across the now silent room, "Sarah Martinez sits on the board of directors for our hospital group's charitable foundation. She's been instrumental in directing millions in funding to underprivileged communities. When she called to tell me how she was being treated at her own daughter's wedding." He shook his head. "Well, let's just say the Grand Plaza doesn't associate with that kind of behavior." Emma stared at her mother, tears in her eyes. "Mom, I had no idea. Why didn't you ever say anything?" Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. "Because I wanted you to make your own way, sweetheart. I never wanted my connections to influence your choices." She paused, looking around the room. "But I also won't let anyone treat us like we're beneath them." "This is ridiculous." Patricia's voice was shrill. "You can't just shut down our wedding. Do you know how much we spent?" "Oh, I'm not shutting it down," Sarah said calmly. She nodded to Marcus, who gestured to the staff waiting by the doors. They began wheeling in new serving carts, and fresh teams of waiters entered the ballroom. "I'm taking over." Patricia's mouth opened and closed soundlessly as Sarah continued. "The wedding will proceed, if Emma and James still want it to, but under new management and new seating arrangements." James, who had been watching everything unfold in stunned silence, finally stepped forward. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm so sorry. I had no idea my parents were treating you this way." He turned to Emma. "And I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you and your mom sooner." Emma looked between her fiancé and her mother, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, I'm sorry too. I should have said something." "No more apologies," Sarah said firmly. "This is still your day. Let's make it a good one." She turned to the gathered guests. "Everyone who'd like to stay and celebrate Emma and James's wedding is welcome, as long as they understand that in this room, everyone is equal. Everyone is family." The transformation that followed was remarkable. The Thompson family, thoroughly humbled, retreated to quiet corners. The other guests, free from the atmosphere of judgment and pretense, began to relax. And Emma was glowing with pride as she looked at her mother. As the ceremony began, slightly delayed but more genuine than it would have been, Sarah took her seat in the front row. Jenny, who had changed back into her uniform along with the other staff, caught her eye and winked. Sarah smiled, thinking about how different this day had turned out from what she'd expected. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't about getting even. It was about standing up and showing your true worth. But there was still one more surprise in store for everyone. As the reception began, Sarah watched the transformed atmosphere with quiet satisfaction. The string quartet played softly in the background while guests mingled freely, the former social hierarchies forgotten in the wake of the afternoon's revelations. Patricia Thompson sat at a table near the kitchen doors, the very one she'd assigned to Sarah, looking thoroughly deflated. Her husband Richard kept checking his phone, no doubt trying to assess the social damage of the day's events. Sarah almost felt sorry for them. Almost. "Mrs. Martinez?" James approached her table, looking nervous but determined. "Could we talk privately for a moment?" Sarah nodded, following her new son-in-law to a quiet corner of the ballroom. James took a deep breath before speaking. "I want you to know," he began, "that I've made some decisions. I'm stepping away from my family's hospital administration position." Sarah's eyebrows rose in surprise. "James, that's not necessary." "It is," he insisted. "I've been thinking about this for a while, actually. I went into healthcare administration because it was expected, but," he straightened his shoulders, "I want to go to medical school, like Emma. I want to help people directly, the way you do." A warm smile spread across Sarah's face. "Emma never told me that." "I never told her," James admitted. "I was afraid of disappointing my parents, but after seeing you today, how you handled everything with such grace and strength, I realized I've been living my life trying to please the wrong people." Before Sarah could respond, Marcus Chen appeared at her elbow. "Sarah, there's someone here who'd like to speak with you." He gestured toward the ballroom entrance, where an elegant older woman stood waiting. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as she recognized Dr. Catherine Reynolds, the current health commissioner for the state. "Sarah Martinez," Dr. Reynolds said warmly, approaching their group. "I'm so glad I could make it, even if I am fashionably late." Patricia and Richard Thompson, who had been watching from their table, practically tripped over themselves rushing over. "Commissioner Reynolds," Patricia gushed. "What an unexpected honor." "Save it, Patricia," the commissioner cut her off coolly. "I'm here to speak with Sarah." She turned back to Sarah with a smile. "The board meeting is next week, and I wanted to discuss this in person. We've reviewed your proposal for the new community health initiative, and we're not just approving it, we're doubling the funding." The Thompsons' jaws dropped in perfect synchronization. "But more than that," Dr. Reynolds continued, "I'm retiring next year, and the governor has been asking for recommendations for my replacement." She gave Sarah a meaningful look. "I'd like to put your name forward, if you're interested." The ballroom had gone quiet again, everyone straining to hear the conversation. Sarah felt Emma's hand slip into hers. She hadn't even noticed her daughter approaching. "Mom," Emma whispered, "you never told me about any of this." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. "I've always believed that our work should speak for itself. All those nights I was just working extra shifts. I was also building relationships, creating programs, finding ways to help more people. I never needed the recognition. I just wanted to make a difference. And that," Dr. Reynolds said firmly, "is exactly why you're perfect for the position." Patricia Thompson looked like she might faint. But she's just a nurse." "Just a nurse?" Dr. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Thompson, just a nurse Sarah Martinez has done more for healthcare in this state than your entire family's hospital network. While you were planning galas and worrying about social status, she was actually saving lives and changing the system from within." James stepped forward. "Commissioner Reynolds, I'd actually love to hear more about the Community Health Initiative. I'm planning to apply to medical school and medical school." Patricia interrupted, her voice shrill. "But you're supposed to take over the family business." "No, Mother," James said firmly. "I'm going to make my own way, just like Emma did, just like Mrs. Martinez taught her to do." The reception continued into the evening, but with a distinctly different tone than anyone had expected. The Thompsons retreated to their table, their social cards thoroughly played. Meanwhile, Sarah found herself surrounded by guests eager to discuss her work and vision for the future of healthcare in their state. As she watched Emma and James share their first dance, Sarah reflected on how differently this day had turned out from what she feared. She hadn't set out to humiliate the Thompsons or prove her worth. She'd simply refused to be diminished by their prejudice. Jenny appeared at her side with a glass of champagne. "You know," the young server said with a grin, "when my sister told me about the nurse who saved her life, she said you were some kind of angel. I think you might actually be a ninja." Sarah laughed, accepting the champagne. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about standing tall and letting your actions speak for themselves. Later that night, as the reception was winding down, Emma found her mother alone on the hotel's terrace, looking out at the city lights. "Mom?" Emma's voice was soft. "I'm so sorry about everything. Not just today, but I've been pulling away from you, trying to fit into James's world. I forgot who I am, who you taught me to be." Sarah turned to her daughter, seeing not the bride in her expensive gown, but the little girl who used to fall asleep reading medical textbooks because she wanted to be just like her mom. You never have to apologize for trying to find your way, Sarah said, pulling her daughter into a hug. But remember, your value isn't in who you marry or what family you join. It's in what you do, how you treat people, and the difference you make in the world. Emma wiped away a tear, careful of her makeup. I know that now, more than ever. She paused, then added with a small smile, Health Commissioner Martinez. Sarah laughed. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Why not? After today, I'd say anything is possible. As they stood there, mother and daughter looking out at the city together, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. The Thompsons had tried to put her in her place, not realizing that she had built her own place, one of respect, dignity, and real accomplishment. The next morning, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. The staff can't stop talking about yesterday. You've become a legend at the Grand Plaza. Sarah smiled as she typed her reply. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living your truth and letting others learn from it. As she set her phone down, Sarah thought about all the paths that had led to this moment. Years of hard work, quiet dedication, and unwavering integrity had built a foundation that no amount of social snobbery could shake. The Thompsons had seen her as just a nurse, not realizing that every life she touched, every program she built, and every relationship she forged had created a legacy far more valuable than their superficial status. In the end, she hadn't needed to destroy them. She'd simply needed to stand in her own light and let the truth illuminate everything else. And as she prepared for another day at the hospital, commissioner's nomination or not, she still had patients who needed her. Sarah Martinez smiled, knowing that sometimes the greatest victory isn't in proving others wrong, but in proving yourself right. The mahogany walls of my father's study seemed to close in as he signed the final document with a flourish. The scratching of his Mont Blanc pen against paper felt like nails on a chalkboard. There, he said, sliding the trust fund transfer papers across his desk. It's done. All $2 million will go to Jennifer instead. My name is Emma Chen, and at 28, I was being written off by my family for the last time. My sister Jennifer stood by the window, trying to hide her triumphant smile as she watched our father disinherit me. Emma, my mother sighed from her perch on the leather armchair, if you just gone to law school like your sister, if you just applied yourself. I did apply myself, I said quietly, watching my father's expression darken. Just not to what you wanted. Playing with computers in your apartment isn't applying yourself, he snapped, standing up to tower over his desk. Your sister made partner at Thompson & Mitchell at 32. Meanwhile, you're what? Coding websites for small businesses, living in that tiny apartment in the city. I could have told them then. Could have explained that what they saw as playing with computers was actually the development of an age-driven financial technology platform that was about to revolutionize global markets. Could have mentioned the Series B funding meeting I had next week with venture capitalists who'd already valued my company at $300 million. But I didn't. I learned long ago that my family only saw what they wanted to see. You're right, I said instead, standing up. I'm clearly a disappointment. Jennifer deserves the money more than I do. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably by the window. For a moment, I caught a glimpse of the sister I used to know, the one who'd shared ice cream with me after bad days at school, who'd helped me with my math homework before our parents' expectations had driven a wedge between us. Emma, she started, but I held up a hand. It's fine, Jen, really. Congratulations on making partner. You've earned this. As I walked toward the door, my mother called after me. Will you at least join us for dinner? Your father's reserved a table at Le Bernardin to celebrate Jennifer's promotion. I turned back one last time, taking in the scene. My father's disapproving frown, my mother's practiced worry, Jennifer's mix of triumph and guilt. The study walls were lined with law degrees and bar association awards. Not a single photo of me or my accomplishments in sight. I have a meeting, I said, but enjoy dinner. The drive back to the city gave me time to think. The trust fund had never been about the money. I had more than enough of my own now. It was about what it represented, My parents had set up identical trusts for Jennifer and me when we were born, meant to be released on our 33rd birthdays. But a clause allowed them to redirect the funds if they felt one of us was failing to live up to the family standards. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya, my CTO. VCs moved the meeting up to tomorrow. You ready? I smiled, thinking about the presentation we prepared. More than ready, I typed back. Time to change the game. When I reached my apartment, the tiny space my father had sneered at, I kicked off my heels and walked straight to my home office. The wall-mounted screens displayed real-time data from our AI system's latest test run. Numbers scrolled past, each one representing another successful prediction, another validation of what we'd built. The playing with computers my father dismissed had led to the creation of aita, adaptive trading heuristics and enhanced neural analytics, an AI system that could predict market movements with unprecedented accuracy, processing millions of data points to identify patterns human traders could never spot. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Jennifer. I'm sorry about Dad, her text read. You know how he gets. The trust fund doesn't matter anyway, right? You're doing fine with your computer stuff. I stared at the message, noting how even Jennifer's attempt at kindness came with a subtle dismissal of my work. Thanks, Jen, I replied. Enjoy dinner. Turning back to my screens, I pulled up the pitch deck for tomorrow's EC meeting. The numbers were staggering. Our beta testing had shown aita outperforming traditional trading algorithms by 312%. Major banks were already quietly reaching out, hoping to get early access to the technology. A soft chime announced an incoming video call from Maya. Her face appeared on one of the screens, her usual energy somewhat subdued. Hey, she said, how'd it go with the family? About as well as expected, I replied, running a hand through my hair. Dad signed over my trust fund to Jennifer. They're celebrating at a Bernardin right now. Maya shook her head. Their loss. You ready to show those VCs tomorrow what real success looks like? I pulled up another screen showing aita's latest test results. Actually, I've been thinking, what if we don't take the VC money? Maya's eyes widened. What? Emma, we're talking about a $50 million investment at a $300 million valuation. That's small thinking, I interrupted. Look at these numbers, Maya. We don't need VC funding. We could go public within a year, maintain complete control, and I smiled, thinking about my father's face at the IPO ceremony, really show them what playing with computers can accomplish. Maya was quiet for a moment, processing. Then a slow grin spread across her face. You want to build an empire. I want to build something that even my father can't dismiss, I corrected. Something that changes the way the entire financial world operates. Your father's a corporate lawyer, Maya pointed out. Wouldn't he have heard about aita if it's as revolutionary as we think? I laughed. Maya, my father still uses a BlackBerry and thinks coding is something you learn at a community college. He hasn't heard about aita because he's never bothered to ask what I actually do. His loss, Maya said firmly. So what's the play? Cancel the VC meeting? I shook my head, an idea forming. No, we use it. But instead of seeking investment, we pitch partnerships, get them to open doors to their network of financial institutions. We don't need their money, we need their connections. 6 months after being disinherited, I stood in our new office space in downtown Manhattan, watching our team of engineers work on aita's final testing phase. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a perfect view of the financial district, the same institutions that would soon be revolutionized by our technology. Emma, Maya called from her workstation, you need to see this. I walked over, coffee in hand, to look at her screen. The latest simulation results were beyond even our most optimistic projections. Athena wasn't just predicting market movements, it was identifying market-moving events before they happened. Is this accurate? I asked, leaning closer to study the data. Maya nodded, her eyes bright with excitement. Triple verified. The AI spotted patterns in social media, news articles, and trading behavior that predicted the Morgan Stanley merger announcement 3 days before it happened. If this had been real trading instead of a simulation, we would have made billions, I finished. Have you shown this to the compliance team? That's the best part, she said, pulling up another screen. Everything's completely legal. Athena isn't using insider information. It's just better at connecting publicly available data points than any human could ever be. My phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. Hey sis, haven't heard from you in months. Parents are worried. Dad says your phone number at the apartment is disconnected. I smiled slightly. Of course it was disconnected. We'd moved the entire operation to a $40 million office space 6 blocks from Wall Street, but my family still thought I was playing with computers in my tiny apartment. I'm fine, I texted back. Just busy with work. Another buzz, this time from our head of legal, David. SEC meeting confirmed for next week. They're interested in the compliance protocols. That was an understatement. When word had gotten out that we were developing something revolutionary in the fintech space, the SEC had practically begged for a meeting. They wanted to understand our technology before it hit the market. Smart of them, really. Ms. Chen. Our receptionist's voice came through the intercom. There's a Mr. Thompson here to see you. He says he's from Thompson and Mitchell. My heart skipped a beat. Thompson and Mitchell, Jennifer's law firm. One of the largest corporate law firms in the city. Send him in, I said, straightening my blazer. James Thompson himself walked through the door, senior partner and my sister's boss. He looked exactly like the kind of lawyer my father admired. Silver-haired, perfectly tailored suit, exuding old money confidence. Ms. Chen, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion. But when we heard rumors about what you're developing here. You heard rumors? I asked, gesturing for him to sit. From whom? He smiled diplomatically. Let's just say certain financial institutions are very interested in your technology. They're our clients and they asked us to explore potential relationships. Does my sister know you're here? His smile faltered slightly. Jennifer? No, this meeting is strictly confidential. Though I must admit, I was surprised to learn you were her sister. She's never mentioned. That she has a sister who plays with computers? I finished for him. I imagine she hasn't mentioned me much at all. Maya appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. Emma, sorry to interrupt, but the Goldman Sachs team is here for their demo. Thompson's eyebrows shot up at the mention of Goldman Sachs. I could almost see him recalculating my worth in his head. Mr. Thompson, I said, standing, I apologize, but I have another meeting. If you'd like to discuss potential relationships, you can contact our legal team to schedule something. Of course, he said, rising quickly. But Ms. Chen, whatever Goldman is offering, we can match it. Thompson and Mitchell represents half the major financial institutions in the city. I walked into the door, feeling a strange satisfaction. It's not about the money, Mr. Thompson. It's about changing the game entirely. I'm sure you understand. After you left, Maya gave me a knowing look. You enjoyed that, didn't you? Maybe a little, I admitted. How long until he tells Jennifer about our little operation here? Given that your sister's firm represents billions in financial interests, I'd say about 5 minutes. Sure enough, my phone buzzed again. Emma, why didn't you tell me? Jim Thompson just came back from your office looking like he'd seen a ghost. What exactly are you working on? I put my phone away without responding. There would be time for family revelations later. Right now, we had a demonstration to prepare for. The Goldman Sachs team was already waiting in our conference room. 5 executives in expensive suits, trying not to look too eager. Their presence here was a coup. Getting Goldman as an early partner would open every door in the financial world. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, standing at the head of the table. What you're about to see will fundamentally change how the markets operate. But first, I need you all to sign these NDAs. The morning of our IPO, I stood in front of my mirror adjusting my suit. Chanel, not that my parents would recognize the difference. The Wall Street Journal sat on my desk, our company's impending public offering splashed across the front page. ATE and AI set to launch biggest tech IPO of the year. Expected valuation, $800 million. My phone had been buzzing nonstop for days. First Jennifer, then my mother. Finally, even my father had tried to reach out. I'd let their messages pile up unanswered. They'd all be at the ceremony today anyway. The invitations had gone out weeks ago. Ready for this? Maya asked, appearing in my office doorway. She traded her usual tech company casual wear for a sharp business suit. Born ready, I replied, picking up my presentation folder. How's ATA performing this morning? Like a dream. The latest analysis shows her predicting market movements with 99.7% accuracy. The trading floor is buzzing. Everyone knows this is going to change everything. We made our way to the stock exchange where crowds had already gathered. Financial reporters lined the entrance, cameras flashing as we approached. I caught snippets of their commentary. Youngest female CEO to take a company public. Revolutionary AI trading technology. Already has contracts with major financial institutions. Inside, the exchange was electric with anticipation. Our team had gathered near the podium, along with representatives from every major bank and financial institution in the city. And there, in the front row, sat my family. My father's face was a study in conflicting emotions, pride warring with regret, confusion battling with awe. My mother kept dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. And Jennifer just stared at me like she was seeing her sister for the first time. Emma, my father stepped forward as I approached the podium. We had no idea. No, I said calmly, you didn't, because you never asked. Before he could respond, the exchange president called me to the stage. It was time to start the ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet trading floor. 3 years ago, I started coding ATA in a tiny apartment. People called it playing with computers. They said I was wasting my potential. They couldn't see that I was building the future. My eyes met my father's as I continued. Today, ATA processes more financial data in a second than all of Wall Street could analyze in a month. She predicts market movements with near-perfect accuracy, all while operating within strict ethical and legal guidelines. But more importantly, she represents what's possible when you believe in your vision, even when no one else does. The ceremony proceeded according to tradition: speeches, handshakes, the ringing of the bell. But the real moment came when our stock price appeared on the big board. The room erupted in cheers as the numbers soared past our projected opening. By lunch, my personal stake in the company was worth over $300 million, more than 100 times the trust fund my father had signed away. After the ceremony, my family approached hesitantly. Jennifer spoke first. Emma, I'm so sorry, she said, her lawyer's composure cracking. All this time, when you tried to tell us about your work. Save it, I said, but not unkindly. You all saw what you wanted to see. My father cleared his throat. Princess, about the trust fund. Keep it, I interrupted. Jennifer earned it, just like I earned this. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is believe you'll fail. It makes success that much sweeter. But we're family, my mother protested. We should have supported you. I looked around at my real family, Maya and our team, the people who believed in the vision when it was just lines of code in a tiny apartment. You're right, we are family, I said. Which is why you're all invited to dinner tonight. I've reserved the private room at Le Bernardin. I hear it's a good place to celebrate success. My father's face reddened at the reference to that dinner 6 months ago, but he managed a small smile. We'd be honored. Later that evening, as my family marveled at our company's technology and success over expensive wine, I thought about the long road that had led here, the nights coding while they thought I was wasting time, the meetings they dismissed as playing with computers, the victory they tried to give to someone else. My phone buzzed, a message from Maya. Stock closed at double our projected value. You're officially a billionaire. I smiled, watching my father try to explain to his country club friends how his disappointing daughter had built an empire right under his nose. Success, I'd learned, wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. Emma, Jennifer said, pulling me aside. I need to tell you something. After Jim Thompson came back from your office that day, I looked up everything I could find about ATA. I started buying stock in every company that showed interest in your technology. I believed in you, even if I didn't show it. I raised an eyebrow. Did you make money? She grinned. Enough to pay back that trust fund 10 times over. Good, I said, because I'm going to need a lawyer I can trust for our next expansion phase. Someone who understands both technology and family. Her eyes widened. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a chance to be part of something bigger than both of us. What do you say, sis? Ready to play with computers? The next morning, as I walked into our office building, now officially the ATGNA Tower, I passed a young intern working on code in the lobby during her break. She reminded me of myself, back when everyone thought I was wasting time with computers. Keep at it, I told her. Sometimes the biggest success stories start in the smallest apartments. She looked up, recognition dawning in her eyes. Miss Chen. I read about how you built aita. My parents think I'm crazy for choosing programming over law school. But you have a vision. I finished for her. Hold on to that. And remember, the people who underestimate you today will be reading about you tomorrow. As I rode the elevator to my office, I thought about legacy. Not the kind my father had tried to force on me, but the kind you build yourself, one line of code at a time. Athena wasn't just changing the financial world, she was proving that success doesn't always look like people expect it to. And sometimes, the best inheritance isn't the one you're given, it's the one you create for yourself.
I find myself entangled in a rather perplexing situation as I consider approaching your father regarding a troubling incident related to a potential mugging of my own father. Indeed, suspicions have arisen concerning your father's involvement in this alleged mugging. Currently, he is situated at home. Would you be open to allowing me a brief audience with him for an inquiry? The police officer displayed a momentary sense of bewilderment in response to my request, his expression betraying a subtle confusion. Despite this, he eventually agreed, stating, "Please, let me see him." Consequently, I led the police officer into the confines of my home, unlocking the door to reveal my father's presence. Upon beholding my father, the police officer was visibly taken aback by the unexpected revelation. This incident transpired a few months ago, and as I reflect upon it, I feel compelled to share a bit more about myself. My name is David, and I am currently a fourth-year university student. Despite my aspirations to work for a prominent company, there lingers an unresolved dilemma within me. The decision revolves around whether or not to inherit my father's company. You see, my father holds the esteemed position of president at a modest factory. During my formative years, I harbored a desire to follow in my father's footsteps, aspiring to become a president like him. However, as I entered my rebellious phase, I distanced myself from this ambition, feeling a sense of embarrassment towards my father perpetually adorned in work clothes stained with oil. This sentiment persisted through my teenage years, and to some extent, endures even now. As I matured into adulthood and engaged in part-time employment, my perspective on my father began to shift. I developed a newfound respect for his tireless work ethic, which sustained not only our family but also supported numerous employees and their families. Yet despite this growing admiration, an underlying sentiment lingered. A perception that the conventional salaryman, donned in a suit and toiling diligently, possessed a certain allure absent in my father's occupation. The narrative takes an intriguing turn when, during a shopping excursion with my father, we were unexpectedly hailed from behind. Turning together, my father and I encountered Richard, a contemporary of my father's from high school. Dressed in a suit and on an external sales trip, Richard hailed from a prestigious corporation. In the course of our conversation, Richard casually inquired if my father had indeed assumed control of the family business. This revelation prompted Richard to express disdain for what he referred to as the dirty little factory managed by my father, emphasizing the incredulity that a high school graduate could rise to the position of president. Stunned by Richard's derogatory remarks, I found myself grappling with the realization that the factory in question was initiated by my grandfather, making my father the second-generation custodian of this familial legacy. I had long been aware that he had assumed control after graduating from high school. However, the revelation of a classmate mocking him caught me off guard. Richard maintained a silent smile while addressing my father. "So, did you manage to expand your father's factory? You did mention during high school that you intended to take over the company and make it bigger." To this, my father admitted, "Unfortunately, I lacked the business acumen, and that dream didn't materialize. It seemed inevitable that I excelled in practical skills but lagged behind in intellectual pursuits. Nonetheless, I felt relieved that our family didn't face financial ruin." Richard chuckled heartily, playfully slapping my father on the shoulder. Well, David, we'll catch up at the next reunion. I've got more work to do, he added before leaving. My father looked slightly uncomfortable, prompting me to redirect the conversation. Suggesting a change of topic, my father proposed that we continue shopping. At that moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that my father's work had been belittled without any response from me. The internal debate about whether to take over my father's company or pursue a career at a prestigious corporation leaned decisively toward the latter. A few weeks later, fate intervened as my father's alumni association event took place at the bar where I worked part-time. Despite the bustling atmosphere, I managed to serve at the table hosting my father's gathering. Fulfilling my duties silently, I approached the room where the alumni association was held. My father warmly greeted me, introducing me as his son to those present. Though similar in appearance, I maintained a serious demeanor, responding awkwardly to the teasing of my father's inebriated classmates. Richard, seated nearby, noticed our interaction and remarked, "We met recently too, David, right? Are you planning to take over your father's small factory?" This question added another layer to my ongoing contemplation of my professional path. When I truthfully admitted to still contemplating my decision, an unpleasant alcoholic breath emanated from Richard, leaving me repulsed. Boisterously, he exclaimed, "Stop it. Your father's company is nothing extraordinary. David should consider working for a company like mine instead of inheriting such a lackluster business." Despite his inebriated state, Richard proceeded to boast about his professional achievements, narrating a career history that began as a mere assistant, but now claimed the head of accounting position. A sense of unease crept over me as I sensed discrepancies in his narrative. I sensed that something was amiss, but I chose to keep my concerns to myself, wary of potential complications that might arise from challenging him. My father, on the other hand, seemed unfazed by Richard's inebriation, and, in fact, found the situation amusing. With a lighter mood due to his own inebriation, he asked Richard about changes in his department since their last encounter a few weeks ago. Questioning the sudden shift from sales to accounting, my father caught Richard off guard. Eventually, Richard admitted to an abrupt transfer, asserting that sales wasn't his forte. However, my father pointed out the incongruity in Richard's story, revealing that the company Richard proudly spoke of had actually been absorbed by a foreign corporation, with its accounting department relocated overseas. Laughter erupted among the party attendees as Richard, now embarrassed and regretful, attempted to save face but ultimately decided to leave the gathering with heavy footsteps. Witnessing my father's ability to address the uncomfortable truth that others had noticed but hesitated to mention, I found a sense of pride in his candor, even in his intoxicated state. As half a year passed since that incident, my internal dilemma regarding whether or not to take over my father's company only intensified. The confusion deepened with each passing day, leaving me uncertain about the path I should pursue. One day, while relaxing at home, the intercom interrupted my contemplation. In the absence of my mother, I answered the door to find a visitor in uniformed clothes identifying themselves as a police officer. Surprised and apprehensive, I responded with a stiff voice, wondering if I had inadvertently committed some transgression. The police officer then brought up a purse-snatching incident, expressing a need to inquire about the matter with my father. The mention of such an incident left me puzzled, and I began to wonder about the unfolding events that seemed to add further layers of complexity to my already tumultuous life. Indeed, the enigmatic cloud of suspicion had descended upon my father, casting a shadow over our tranquil abode. The air thick with uncertainty, I found myself face to face with a stern-faced police officer bearing the weight of an accusation that seemed inconceivable. Inquiring about my father's whereabouts, the officer, with an air of professionalism, sought confirmation of his presence within our home. The exchange took an unexpected turn as the officer, grappling with the perplexity in my tone, requested to lay eyes upon my father. Navigating the corridors of my dwelling, I ushered the law enforcement representative into the sacred space of our familial sanctuary, a room adorned with a Buddhist altar and a photograph capturing the essence of my late father's spirit. In the ensuing revelation, I divulged the heartbreaking truth to the officer that my father had met an untimely demise in a tragic traffic accident. The officer, displaying empathy amid the unfolding tragedy, extended condolences for the loss. Yet my quest for justice and clarity persisted, and I sought to discern the source of this bewildering accusation that had stained my father's reputation. However, the officer, bound by the constraints of confidentiality, refrained from divulging the identity of the accuser. Apologies flowed from the lips of the officer as he departed, leaving me grappling with an unsettling sense of confusion and the nagging question of who had leveled such a grave accusation against my departed father. Days unfolded like the pages of a mystery novel, each chapter bringing a new layer of complexity to the narrative as I took on the responsibilities left in the void by my father's absence. Immersed in the daily operations of my father's factory, I witnessed my mother's valiant attempts to fill the void left by his absence. However, the weight of age limited her contributions. Amidst the mechanical symphony of the factory floor, the harmony was shattered by the sudden intrusion of Richard, a character bearing an air of accusation and vengeance. His booming voice reverberated through the cacophony, demanding restitution for a perceived transgression committed by my father. Caught in the crossfire of accusations, I attempted to reason with Richard, asserting my father's innocence in the face of the alleged purse-snatching incident. The atmosphere within the factory shifted, with the ceaseless hum of machinery giving way to hushed whispers and curious glances exchanged among the employees. Richard, however, remained resolute in his pursuit of justice, convinced of my father's guilt. His insistence echoed through the industrial expanse, causing a disturbance that transcended the confines of the factory. Frustration surged within me as I defended my father's honor, challenging Richard's assertions and questioning the veracity of his claims. As the confrontation unfolded, Richard revealed the purported timeline of the incident, fixing it 2 weeks prior. A murmur rippled through the gathered employees, their confusion palpable. My persistent queries regarding the accuracy of the timeline only fueled Richard's frustration, intensifying his vocal protestations. In the midst of the tumult, Richard's disparaging remarks about my father's workplace and colleagues added fuel to the emotional fire. Yet the gravest affront was his attempt to pin the blame for the alleged purse-snatching squarely on my deceased father's shoulders. My chest tightened with a mix of anger and sorrow as Richard persisted in his accusations, seemingly oblivious to the irrefutable truth, illuminating the fact that my father, the subject of this tumultuous ordeal, had met his end in a tragic traffic accident a month prior. The realization hung heavy in the air, a poignant reminder of the fragility of life and the injustice faced even in death. Richard appeared as though he had ingested an entire pigeonhole, and with an amused expression he muttered, "Ha!" Undeterred, I pressed on, questioning the incredulous accusation he had just hurled in my father's direction. How could my father snatch purses when he passed away just 1 month ago? Perhaps there wasn't any purse snatching at all, I asserted. However, my skepticism wasn't merely based on the recent events. It was rooted in the knowledge I had gained during our class reunion. It came to light that Richard, since his school days, had been a habitual liar. This revelation occurred during the reunion, where I discovered that his dishonesty had deep roots. Moreover, it turned out that Richard had harbored a long-standing jealousy toward my father, dating back to their school days. This envy sprouted from a romantic rivalry. The girl Richard liked had chosen my father over him. This petty jealousy had fueled an unnecessary rivalry, leaving me unable to forgive Richard for attempting to tarnish my deceased father's reputation with baseless accusations. As Richard persistently asserted his unfounded claims, an interjection from another direction pierced the air. Someone emphatically shouted, "Your president wouldn't do something like that." Our president is a serious person who walks around with honesty, teaching technology, and encouraging independence. He always considers the well-being of the staff and business partners, prioritizing that over profits. The voices praising my father began to multiply, and I felt a mix of emotions, including shame for once thinking my father's work was embarrassing. Amidst the rising tide of support for my father, Richard, trembling and tearful, found himself on the receiving end of an unexpected defense of my father's character by the factory workers. It was a poignant moment that revealed my father's true standing among his peers. In the aftermath, I dealt the decisive blow to Richard by pledging to consult with the police over his false accusations against my father. Overwhelmed and unable to counter the mounting evidence, Richard raised his voice and fled the factory. True to my word, I reported Richard's false accusations to the police, supported by a recording of his statements made by a thoughtful staff member during the heated confrontation. The presence of irrefutable evidence expedited the legal process, leading to Richard's swift apprehension. His attempt to frame my father backfired, transforming his lie into a crime for which he paid a penance in jail. The relief I felt was palpable, knowing that Richard had received the comeuppance he deserved. Days later, Richard's supposed wife sought redemption and arrived at our house with a gift box, apologizing to me and my mother. She confirmed that Richard's actions were a result of the wounds he suffered at the reunion. As it turned out, Richard, once an elite employee, had been fired from his company, struggling to secure new employment. His lies about being an elite crumbled under scrutiny, especially when his inebriated confessions exposed the inconsistencies, ultimately leading to his own embarrassment and downfall. As he grappled with mounting resentment towards my father, an insidious plan began to take root in Richard's mind, a sinister plot to frame him. The sheer audacity of Richard's intention left me utterly disgusted, particularly when I learned of his preposterous rationale for resorting to lies and deceit. Interestingly, it appeared that Richard's wife shared my sentiments. She confided in me, expressing her profound disappointment in Richard's actions and revealing her intention to initiate divorce proceedings. The revelation further underscored the gravity of Richard's transgressions. Adding to the complexity of the situation was the fact that Richard, seemingly devoid of any familial ties, had no children waiting for him upon potential release from jail. This realization cast a somber light on his future prospects. Upon my graduation from college, I found myself at a pivotal juncture. The recent passing of my father weighed heavily on my mind, and I harbored concerns about the state of the company he left behind. Motivated by a dual sense of responsibility and an unshakable desire to honor the legacy of those who had supported my father during Richard's malicious lies, I made the decision to step into the role of leading the company. The decision was multifaceted. Firstly, I felt a genuine concern for the effective management of the company in the wake of my father's demise. Secondly, the impassioned voices of the staff members who had steadfastly defended my father resonated within me. Their loyalty and dedication fueled my determination to become a president who would be both loved and respected by the staff. This incident became a transformative moment for me. Armed with a degree in business administration, I recognized my ability to manage the aspects of the company that my father struggled with. However, I also acknowledged my need to learn from the dedicated staff members who possessed valuable insights into the technological facets of the business. The staff members, driven by a collective sense of loyalty and compassion, willingly imparted their knowledge to me, often emphasizing that their efforts were for the sake of my father. Their anecdotes painted a vivid picture of my father's greatness, and with each story, I grew more appreciative of the man he was. Confronted with the realization of my father's true worth, I found myself expressing remorse for not having recognized his greatness while he was alive. Speaking to his portrait after work, I couldn't help but feel a sense of shame as I looked at my oil-stained self. Yet, I began to view those stains as tangible evidence of my father's tireless work ethic. Determined to honor my father's legacy, I pledged to become a president who mirrored his virtues. I was resolute in my commitment to make his dream of expanding the town factory, a legacy passed down since my grandfather's generation, a reality. Addressing his portrait once again, this time with newfound determination, I spoke of my aspirations and felt an ethereal connection, as if my father were smiling down upon me. From that moment forward, I dedicated myself to working tirelessly, aspiring to become a president worthy of my father's legacy and realizing his dream of expanding the family's factory that had endured through generations. Hey everyone, it's June. My husband Gabrielle and I are collaborating on this story, but before we dive in, I need to share a rather unpleasant experience. My first encounter with Gabrielle's parents, Louise and Lena. Let me fill you in on what they had to say. Brace yourselves. I can't believe you date someone like Gabrielle, a real underachiever. This woman has no redeeming qualities. She merely works a desk job in a small office. How on earth will she provide us with a good life? Mom, I love June, and she's the only one for me. I don't care about her income or job. I never cared about those things. Well, we care, Gabrielle. We've made that clear from the start. If you paid any attention, you'd know. Listen, Gabrielle, if this girl doesn't bring more to the table, she can't be our daughter-in-law. We won't approve. Find someone else. No, Mom, June is the one for me. I'm going to marry her. I had the entire proposal planned, and now you've ruined everything. I was stunned as this conversation unfolded. Yes, I was surprised about Gabrielle planning to propose. We had been dating for 3 years, and while I hoped for a proposal, I didn't expect it to happen so soon. However, what left me truly shocked was Louise and Lena's alarming behavior toward our relationship. Gabrielle had warned me about them, saying, June, I've met your dad. He's great. But let me be clear, my parents are not good people. I was naive, not comprehending how cruel and selfish parents could be. While Gabrielle financially supported his parents, he distanced himself from them, revealing that they were motivated by greed, always pushing him to marry rich. The day I met his parents, I realized how true his words were. Despite their protests, Gabrielle proposed, and we got married. Although Louise and Lena threatened to boycott the wedding, they eventually attended, thanks to Gabrielle's desperate pleas. He didn't have much family on his side and wanted them there, even though they made it clear they didn't approve. I later discovered that Gabrielle had convinced them to attend by portraying my family as financially stable. While they reluctantly came, their motives were evident. They made it a point to remind me, just so you know, June, we still don't approve of this marriage. Gabrielle is a successful man, and we expected more from him. He really disappointed us by not marrying rich. We wouldn't have come if we thought you had nothing. Thank God your father at least has something to his name. I hope you don't forget us and our gracious presence today when you finally get the house inheritance. Guys, I'm getting married today. My father is healthy and fine. And there's absolutely no reason for you two to even mention an inheritance today. I stormed off, distancing myself from them after hearing their audacious remark. My father was my only living family, and hearing such comments on my wedding day made me sick. I couldn't believe the audacity of Louis and Lena to demand a share of my money. I chose not to inform Gabrielle about this incident, not wanting to spoil his day, and knowing how difficult it was for him to cut ties with his parents. Unfortunately, things took a downward turn from there. Despite Gabrielle and I being happy together, his parents were always meddling in our finances. Louis and Lena persistently pestered us about the exact worth of my father's assets. We never gave them a satisfactory answer, yet their embarrassing and entitled behavior continued. For years, I endured their greedy ways, putting up with their constant demands for more money. They fabricated excuses and guilt-tripped us when we tried to refuse. Their comments about my inheritance never ceased, but I chose to ignore them. The situation hit rock bottom when my father was diagnosed with aggressive cancer, and his time was limited. Living far away, we flew to visit him a couple of times. Louis and Lena were displeased, saying we shouldn't waste money on frequent visits since my father was in hospice and wouldn't live long anyway. I vehemently disagreed, asserting that visiting my dying father was not a waste of money. What we did with our finances was our choice, and Louis and Lena had no right to dictate. Their lack of support and covert requests not to visit my father infuriated me. Thankfully, Gabriel stood up for me and shut down their insensitive conversation. From that day onwards, I was determined to teach them a lesson once I was in a better place. I vowed to show them their place. My father passed away around 3 months after his diagnosis, and I was devastated. I really didn't want to lose him that fast. Witnessing his declining health, I knew it was time. Despite the difficulty, Gabriel was my rock throughout the entire time. He held my hand while I flew to my father's town to arrange his funeral. Louis and Lena were only blowing up my phone, demanding to know about my inheritance and how much I planned to spend on the funeral. I was disgusted with those messages, and so was Gabriel. However, we didn't do anything at the time, both agreeing that they would be served their just desserts after we returned home from the funeral. As predicted, Louis and Lena showed up as soon as Gabriel and I returned home. After entering the house, they started to hound us with questions. So the funeral is finally over. God, I've been dying to know what you got in the inheritance. Your father must have left you the house. What are you even talking about, Lena? How does my inheritance concern you in any way? I just came back from my father's funeral. And this is what you ask. Oh, please, June, don't be such a spoiled sport. Ever since Gabriel married you, we've been wondering why he did it. I mean, you don't have a great job, and neither are you beautiful. What did he ever see in you? Me and Louis guessed that it must be because of money. Mom, what is wrong with you? How can you even insult me and my wife like that? We married each other for love. I have told you this countless times. At least have the decency not to bring it up today. Gabriel, there's no reason to be so dramatic. We're simply asking her a question. Your wife can just answer us and satisfy our curiosity. We don't mind if you marry June for money. In fact, we would be happy to know that you've bagged the great prize. You are truly horrible parents to accuse your own son of being a gold digger. You two are insane. I wonder how a great man like Gabriel was born to such disgusting people. Enough with the small talk, June. Tell us what you got in your inheritance. This is the day I was waiting for. Your father must have left you something. Gabriel told me that he lived in a big house. You could just tell now and buy us a house instead. We will make great use of the money. Besides, we are your parents now. Hearing this made my blood boil, and I seethed with rage while Gabriel looked at his parents in disbelief. Even he couldn't comprehend the fact that his parents could be so greedy and selfish. My father wasn't even dead for a month, and they were already planning to spend my inheritance on themselves. Hell, they even started to call themselves my new parents. At that point, I knew I had to do something. For years, I had put up with them for Gabriel's sake. But today was the day for a change. I wanted to show Gabriel just how bad his parents were, I said. Actually, my dad didn't have the house in his name when he died. I'm sorry to tell you that he did own that house for a long time, but he had to let it go for reasons. What? So you're telling us that your father didn't even own his house anymore? No, like I said, he owned it a long time ago. He had to let go of the house very recently, so no, I did not get the house or any inheritance, as they say. Oh my God, so your father was a poor man after all. I knew you were too cheap to be wealthy. Your father couldn't even keep his house till the end. That poor man died with no house under his name. Leave our son, as you're good for nothing. Mom, our marriage isn't over just because she didn't get an inheritance. You can't just ask her to leave me because of a stupid reason like that. Don't speak over us, Gabriel. We won't allow you to continue this marriage anymore. You have disappointed us by marrying into a poor family. You didn't once think about how you could keep your parents happy. I'm ashamed to have a son like you. June, I'm sure you must have trapped my son into marrying you. People like you can use cheap tricks to lure men. Your final plan was to cut us off and enjoy my son's money alone. Well, guess what, June? I won't let that happen. Louis and Lena started to harass Gabriel to give me a divorce and leave. They told him that he should marry a rich girl so that my in-laws could live the life of luxury they always wanted. Gabriel was getting upset and started to break down. I knew that I had to take the opportunity to help him make a decision. Gabriel, are you going to let your parents do this to us? I have put up with their gold-digging ways for a long time now. I didn't open my mouth because you felt guilty cutting them off. Are you still going to continue to keep them in our life? I don't think we can come back from this. June, I've had enough as well. Mom, Dad, today you have shown me just how bad you are. For years, you have used me to fulfill your dreams. I won't tolerate this anymore. Don't be stupid, Gabriel. This girl would influence you and take you away from your family. We are doing this for your own good as well. We didn't spend money on you so that you can go do charity for someone else. You need to divorce your wife and start afresh. There is still time for you to get a rich wife. We will help you. This time you have made too many mistakes on your own. No, I won't leave my wife because she didn't get an inheritance. I'm done being a puppet in your hands. I will stay with June. You two won't be allowed in my life anymore. What will you do by keeping June in your life? This is not what we ever wanted. She's totally unworthy of you. If you stay in this marriage, we don't want anything to do with you anymore. We won't help you when she robs you and leaves you destitute. Seeing Lena and Louis's horrible behavior, I finally decided to reveal the truth to them. I knew that telling them about my true net worth would make them beg and plead at my feet. I wanted to go all out on them. I wanted Gabriel not to regret his decision in any way, so I said, there will be no need for that, guys. I don't need to rob Gabriel and take his money. I have plenty of money on my own, and I will take care of Gabriel just fine without your help. Look who's talking. You don't have to lie to us to make yourself look better, June. We know the truth. Yes, the truth is that you are the daughter of a poor man, and you don't work a good enough job to make lots of money. In a few months, you will go after Gabriel's money once you are destitute. Well, actually, I am not a poor man's daughter. I have 50 million in my bank account. No, I didn't earn it from my job. Rather, I got it from my father. That is impossible. Your father didn't have anything in his name. You said that yourself. Don't try to fool us, June. We can see through your lies. It won't work for us. We will make sure you divorce our son and leave him to us. I smiled at them and then looked at Gabriel. He was still looking very upset, but gave me the signal to go ahead. He knew me inside out, and so he knew what was coming. I opened my bank account and showed them my bank balance. Louis and Lena took one look at it, and their eyebrows shot up to the sky. They looked at each other and said, "No, no, no, this is impossible. You must have fabricated these bank statements. You said you didn't get an inheritance. How? You even said that your father didn't own his house till the end. Where did this money come from?" What I didn't tell you was the fact that my father owned a big ranch where he lived. He sold the ranch and the house before he died. He gave me an early inheritance before signing himself into hospice. He didn't want me to use my own money for his care. He wasn't like you too. Louis and Lena couldn't believe what they saw. Even my words didn't sound true to them. So they asked Gabriel for the truth. When he confirmed what they saw, they went quiet for a minute and looked at each other again. Then suddenly, they changed their tune completely and said, "Oh, this is such great news. Here I was thinking that my son made a huge mistake. You should have told us sooner about your money." Yeah, we got riled up for nothing. Your father did well for yourself, June. I'm sure you'll make good use of that money. Now, like I said, we're like your own parents. Since this issue has been solved, there's no need for you to leave, Gabriel. You should have said something to us. We doubted your capabilities for nothing. You did marry well, son. I'm so happy today. With the expression Gabriel was making, I knew that my work was done. He would take care of the rest, so I held back my cuss words and let him do the talking. I trusted my husband to make the right choices, and he didn't disappoint me. Gabriel was fuming and started to scream at his parents. He said, "You still have the audacity to stand here and keep talking to us. Hell, how do you still expect June to pay for your comfort? You were hounding us to get divorced. And now you suddenly claim that she's family. How could you do this? We didn't know her net worth back then, Gabriel. She hid the truth from us. How are we supposed to know that she's actually rich? Yeah, June, we'd apologize for assuming the worst. You did surprise us. Anyway, now that you have an apology, can we move past this already? No, absolutely not. There is no way I'm forgiving you two for what you did today. I just got back from burying my father, and you two didn't even let me grieve in peace. I will never forget or forgive this. I think it has been enough already. Since you two think so lowly of me, there is no reason for me to keep you in my life. Today, I will protect myself and my wife from your toxic selves. Get out of my house and don't even think about coming back. From next month onwards, you are on your own. I won't be helping you out financially anymore. You don't deserve any kind of help after today. After Gabriel said that, Luis and Lena went absolutely ballistic on us. They also kept begging us and pleading with us not to cut them off. Neither Gabriel nor I paid any attention to their requests. In fact, Gabriel was so mad that he threatened to call the police if they did not leave our house. Soon after they heard the threats, both Luis and Lena left our property but continued to blow up our phones with calls and texts. We blocked their number before reminding them that we will press charges if they don't stop harassing us. For the next few days, Gabriel completely dealt with his family while I grieved my father properly. I was finally in a peaceful setting where I could reflect on my childhood memories and try to remember my father for the good times. He truly was an amazing man. As soon as he understood that I didn't want to move back south, he sold his property so that I didn't have to worry about it. He didn't even want me to spend money on his medical bills, so he used some of the sale money to pay for hospice. He was truly a great parent, and I still miss him a lot. On the other hand, Gabriel was also grieving the loss of his family, but for other reasons. Yes, he was finally freed from his toxic family, but some people were guilting him about abandoning them. Those people did stop hounding him when Gabriel told them the full story. Now, everyone who knows Luis and Lehman is disgusted with them. The duo still tried to contact us even after we blocked their numbers and changed our locks. We are contemplating taking out restraining orders if they don't stop soon. Meanwhile, I have recently found out that I am pregnant. I'm sad that my father couldn't be a part of my child's life, but me and Gabriel are really enjoying this surprise and preparing ourselves to have a little bundle of joy in our arms soon.
Growing up as Victoria Hamilton's daughter wasn't easy. Every breath I took, every step I made, was carefully monitored and judged. My father, the CEO of Hamilton Industries, had my entire life planned out before I could even walk. Charlotte, darling, he'd say, adjusting his perfectly pressed Armani suit. A Hamilton never settles for second best. Our mansion in Beverly Hills stood as a testament to that philosophy. 28 rooms of carefully curated luxury, each one screaming wealth and power. But to me, it felt more like a golden cage than a home. By the time I turned 25, I had followed my father's blueprint perfectly. Harvard Business School graduate, junior executive at Hamilton Industries, and engaged to Bradley Winchester ILI. Heir to Winchester Technologies and my father's handpicked choice for my husband. There was just one small problem. I was desperately, hopelessly in love with someone else. I met James Mitchell on a rainy Tuesday morning when my Ferrari broke down on the way to work. He was the mechanic who came to my rescue, arriving in a beaten-up tow truck with a smile that made my heart skip a beat. "Looks like your timing belt's shot," he said, wiping his hands on his worn jeans. "I can fix it, but it'll take a few hours." Something about his honest brown eyes and the way he explained everything without talking down to me made me agree to wait at his small garage instead of calling an Uber. That decision changed my life forever. Over cups of terrible vending machine coffee, I discovered James wasn't just any mechanic. He'd worked his way through engineering school, graduating top of his class. He could have taken a cushy corporate job, But he loved working with his hands, solving problems, making things better. Life's too short to spend it doing something just because it looks good on paper, he told me, his eyes twinkling. Those words hit me like a thunderbolt. For the first time, someone had put into words exactly what I'd been feeling all my life. One coffee led to another, then dinner, then stolen moments whenever I could escape my suffocating world. James never asked about my family's wealth, never tried to impress me with fancy restaurants or expensive gifts. Instead, he showed me the joy of simple things, midnight drives along the coast, picnics in hidden parks, and laughter, so much laughter. For 6 months, I lived a double life. Society princess by day, myself by night. But I knew it couldn't last forever. The breaking point came during a charity gala at our mansion. Bradley was droning on about merger strategies to anyone who would listen, while my mother paraded me around like a prized thoroughbred. Charlotte will be taking over the East Coast operations after the wedding, she'd announced to yet another group of socialites. The Winchesters and Hamiltons. Imagine the possibilities. I felt like I was suffocating. Excusing myself, I fled to the garden, my trembling fingers already dialing James's number. I can't do this anymore, I whispered into the phone, tears streaming down my face. I can't marry Bradley. I can't be who they want me to be. James was silent for a moment before speaking. Then don't be. Be who you are, Charlotte. That's the person I fell in love with. That night changed everything. The next morning, I walked into my father's study, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. Daddy, I need to tell you something. My voice shook slightly. I can't marry Bradley. I'm in love with someone else. The explosion that followed was nuclear. My father's face turned purple as I explained about James, about wanting a different life than the one he planned. A mechanic? He roared, his fist slamming onto his mahogany desk. My daughter, a Hamilton, in love with a grease monkey. He's an engineer, Daddy, and he's brilliant. If you just meet him. Absolutely not. My father's voice could have shattered glass. You will marry Bradley as planned, or you can forget about your trust fund, your position at the company, everything. Is that clear? I stood up straighter, channeling strength I didn't know I had. Crystal clear, Daddy. Goodbye. Walking out of that study was the hardest thing I'd ever done. My mother's hysterical tears, my father's threats, the whispers of the household staff. It all followed me as I packed a small bag and left the only home I'd ever known. James was waiting for me outside his modest apartment, worry etched on his face. When I told him what happened, he tried to talk me out of it. Charlotte, that's your whole life you're giving up. Your family, your inheritance. I can't let you do that for me. I silenced him with a kiss. I'm not giving up my life, James. I'm finally starting it. The next few months were a crash course in reality. I moved into James' one-bedroom apartment, got a job as an entry-level business consultant at a small firm, and learned how to live on a budget. It wasn't easy, but for the first time in my life, I felt free. My parents' attempts to bring me to my senses ranged from emotional manipulation to outright threats. They froze my accounts, canceled my credit cards, and even tried to get me fired from my new job. But with each obstacle, James and I grew stronger together. When we decided to get married, we planned a simple ceremony in a local park. No designer dress, no society photographers, just us and a few close friends. The morning of the wedding, I received a text from my mother. Your father and I will be attending. One last chance to fix this mistake. My heart raced as I showed James the message. He squeezed my hand. It's your call, love. Whatever you want. I wanted them there. Despite everything, they were still my parents. So when I walked down the makeshift aisle in my simple white dress from a department store, my eyes instantly found them standing at the back. My father looked like he'd swallowed something sour, while my mother dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Neither moved to join the ceremony. During the reception, a casual barbecue in the park, they made their final play. Charlotte, darling, my mother's voice dripped with desperation. It's not too late. Bradley would still take you back. Think about what you're throwing away. My father cut straight to the point. This is your last chance, young lady. Stay with this person, and you'll never see a penny of your inheritance. Is that what you want? To live in poverty? I looked at James, who was chatting and laughing with our friends, completely at ease in his rented suit. Then I looked at my parents, trapped in their world of wealth and expectations. What I want, I said clearly, is to be happy. James makes me happy. If you can't understand that, then maybe we don't need your money, or you, in our lives. My father's face turned that dangerous shade of purple again. You're an daughter of mine, he spat, turning on his heel. My mother hesitated for a moment, then hurried after him. As they stormed away, James appeared at my side, wrapping an arm around my waist. You okay? I leaned into him, watching my past walk away. Never better. That was 6 months ago. We settled into our life together, working hard, loving harder. James continued at his garage while taking night classes for his master's degree. I threw myself into my consulting work, building my own client base. We were happy, truly happy, even if we had to watch our spending and clip coupons. But there was something James hadn't told me, something that was about to turn my world upside down again. Everything changed on a seemingly ordinary Friday evening. I came home from work early, excited to surprise James with takeout from our favorite Thai place. But our apartment was empty, with a hastily scribbled note on the counter. Working late at the garage. Love you. It wasn't unusual for James to work late, but something felt different. Lately he'd been distracted, taking mysterious phone calls and working odd hours. A knot formed in my stomach as my mind wandered to dark places. Was history repeating itself? Was I about to lose everything again? Unable to sit still, I decided to bring dinner to him at the garage. But when I pulled up, the place was dark. James's beaten-up truck wasn't in its usual spot. My hands trembled as I called his number. Straight to voicemail. Just as panic started to set in, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Mitchell, please come to 1875 Highland Avenue immediately. It's about your husband. My heart stopped. Highland Avenue was in the industrial district, miles from James's garage. With shaking fingers, I typed the address into my GPS and drove through the darkening city, imagining worst-case scenarios. The GPS led me to a massive, modern building with sleek glass walls. Security gates opened automatically as I approached, and a uniformed guard directed me to an underground parking garage. Mrs. Mitchell, he nodded respectfully. Take the executive elevator to the top floor. Executive elevator? Top floor? What was going on? The elevator opened into a stunning office suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. And there, standing at a glass desk with his back to me, was James, but not the James I knew. Gone were the worn jeans and oil-stained t-shirt. Instead, he wore an impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than our monthly rent. When he turned around, his familiar warm smile was tinged with nervousness. Charlie, he said softly, using his special nickname for me, I think it's time I told you everything. Before he could continue, the office door burst open. And there, like a scene from my worst nightmare, stood my father, mother, and Bradley Winchester Eli. What is the meaning of this? My father thundered, his face already turning that familiar shade of purple. Security said Charlotte was headed up here. What are you doing in the CEO's office, you mechanic? James straightened his tie and walked around the desk. Actually, Mr. Hamilton, I am the CEO. James Mitchell, founder and chief executive officer of Mitchell Innovations. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother grabbed a chair for support. Bradley's mouth hung open unattractively, and my father, for the first time in my life, was speechless. But my mother stammered, You're a mechanic. James smiled, taking my hand. I own a chain of auto repair shops, yes. It was my first business, started with a loan from my college professor. But Mitchell Innovations is my main focus. We're a tech company specializing in revolutionary electric vehicle batteries. That's what those late nights at the garage were about. We were finalizing our new prototype. My head was spinning. Why didn't you tell me? Because I needed to know, James said softly, turning to face me. When we met, I just made the Forbes 30 under 30 list. Every woman I dated was only interested in my money, my status. But you fell in love with me when I was just a mechanic. You gave up everything for me. I had to be sure. Mitchell Innovations, my father muttered, his business mind finally catching up. The company that just revolutionized electric vehicle battery technology. The one every major car manufacturer is fighting to partner with. That's you. James nodded. Our market valuation hit $12 billion last week. Not quite Hamilton Industries territory, but we're getting there. I couldn't help but laugh at my father's expression. All those months of looking down on my poor husband, and James had been building an empire right under their noses. And now, James continued, his voice taking on a sharper edge, I'd like to discuss how you treated your daughter. The woman who, by the way, just became one of the largest shareholders in Mitchell Innovations when she married me. My father's face paled. Hamilton Industries had been trying to break into the electric vehicle market for years. Having a connection to Mitchell Innovations would have been a game changer. Now see here, my father blustered, trying to regain control. We were just looking out for Charlotte's best interests. By disarming her? James's voice was steel wrapped in silk. By trying to get her fired? By making her cry herself to sleep for weeks. Daddy, I finally found my voice. You always taught me that Hamiltons never settle for second best. Well, I didn't. I married the most brilliant, kind, and successful man I've ever known. And I did it without knowing about any of this. Charlotte, sweetheart, my mother stepped forward, arms outstretched. We were wrong. We see that now. Please come home. I looked around the magnificent office, then at James, my wonderful husband who had let me find my own way, support myself, grow stronger. I am home, Mom, but if you want to be part of our lives, you'll have to accept us on our terms. No more manipulation. No more control. My father looked like he was choking on something particularly unpleasant. And what about Hamilton Industries? James smiled. Well, sir, we've actually had several offers from your competitors for exclusive partnerships. But I thought, given the family connection, we might consider a different arrangement, if you're interested in discussing it, as equals. The next hour was surreal. My father and James talked business while my mother fussed over my terrible apartment and insisted we move into a proper home. Bradley had slunk away somewhere, probably to lick his wounds. Later that night, back in our small apartment, I finally asked James the question that had been burning in my mind. Why keep working at the garage? Why live like this when you have billions? James pulled me close. The garage keeps me grounded, reminds me where I started. And this apartment, these months with you, they've been the happiest of my life. We made it ours together, without any silver spoons or trust funds. Tears welled in my eyes. I love you, you sneaky billionaire. He laughed. I love you too, you runaway Harris. Life changed after that night, but not in the ways people might expect. We did move, but into a modest house we chose together. I joined Mitchell Innovations as head of their charitable foundation, using our resources to help other young entrepreneurs. James still spends time at his original garage, teaching mechanical skills to underprivileged youth. My parents, well, they're trying. Mom still makes not-so-subtle hints about grandchildren needing trust funds, but Dad has developed a genuine respect for James. Their weekly business meetings often turn into lengthy discussions about everything from classic cars to philosophy. As for me, I finally understood what James meant about life being too short to live it on paper. Sometimes the best things come disguised as broken-down Ferraris and coffee from vending machines. But the best part? Every now and then, when we drive past our old apartment or grab Thai food from our favorite takeout place, James still looks at me the same way he did when he was just a mechanic and I was just a rebel Harris. Because in the end, love doesn't care about bank accounts or business empires. It cares about who you are when everything else is stripped away. And we're simply Charlotte and James, a mechanic and a runaway Harris who found something better than billions. We found each other. I never thought I'd see my parents again after they abandoned me at age 8. That day is burned into my memory forever. Mom and Dad dropping me off at Grandma Rose's house with just a small backpack of clothes, promising they'd be back soon. We just need some time to sort things out, Emma, Mom had said, not quite meeting my eyes. Be good for Grandma. They never came back. The first few months were the hardest. Every day, I'd sit by Grandma's front window after school, watching cars drive by, hoping the next one would be them. Every night, I'd cry myself to sleep, wondering what I'd done wrong, why I wasn't good enough for them to stay. But Grandma Rose was my saving grace. "You're perfect just as you are, my sweet girl," she'd tell me, wiping away my tears. "Some people aren't ready to be parents, and that's not your fault. But I'm here, and I'll always be here." Grandma Rose wasn't just any grandmother. She was brilliant, sophisticated, and as I later learned, incredibly wealthy, but you'd never know it from how she lived. Our home was modest. She drove an old Toyota, and she still worked as a high school principal because she loved shaping young minds. The only hints of her wealth were her impeccable taste in art and the way she'd sometimes casually mention her investments while reading the financial papers. Under Grandma's care, I flourished. She encouraged my love of science, hired tutors when I struggled with math, and celebrated every achievement, no matter how small. When I won first place in the state science fair at 13, she threw a huge party and invited all my friends. "That's my girl," she beamed, hugging me tight. "You're going to change the world someday." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Grandma and I against the world. She never spoke badly about my parents, but she made sure I knew their absence wasn't my fault. "Sometimes people make choices they can't take back," she'd say wisely. "But those choices reflect on them, not on you." I stopped thinking about my parents, stopped hoping they'd return, stopped caring why they left. I had Grandma, and that was enough. She was more than enough. Then came my 18th birthday. Grandma threw me an elegant party at her favorite restaurant, invited all my friends, and gave me a beautiful necklace, a delicate gold chain with a small key pendant. "This is more than just jewelry, Emma," she said mysteriously. "Keep it safe. You'll understand when the time comes." I didn't know then that it would be our last celebration together. 3 months later, Grandma Rose collapsed at school. By the time I reached the hospital, she was gone. Heart attack, the doctor said. Quick and painless. But the pain I felt was anything but quick. It tore through me like a hurricane, leaving nothing but emptiness in its wake. The funeral was beautiful, just as Grandma would have wanted. Her former students filled the church, sharing stories of how she changed their lives. I sat alone in the front row, clutching the key necklace she'd given me, trying to be strong like she taught me to be. That's when I saw them. My parents walked into the church like they belonged there, like they hadn't abandoned their daughter a decade ago. Mom's hair was grayer, Dad had gained weight, but I'd have known them anywhere. My heart stopped, then started racing. They made their way toward me, faces full of what looked like concern. "Emma, sweetheart," Mom said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away instinctively. "We came as soon as we heard. We're so sorry about your grandmother." Dad nodded solemnly. "We know it's been a long time, but we're here now. You'll come home with us, of course. You're still a minor for a few more months, and we're your legal guardians." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 10 years of silence, and now they wanted to play happy family? "I'm not going anywhere with you," I managed to say, my voice shaking with anger. Grandma Rose was my home. "Now, Emma," Mom said, her voice taking on a stern edge I remembered from childhood. "Don't be difficult. We're your parents. You have no choice in this matter." Actually, a deep voice interrupted, "She has every choice." We turned to see a tall man in an expensive suit walking toward us, carrying a leather briefcase. "I'm James Morrison, Rose Montgomery's attorney, and we need to have a conversation about your grandmother's will." My parents' expressions changed instantly. Mom's eyes lit up with barely concealed interest, while Dad straightened his tie nervously. "Of course," he said smoothly. "We're her only living relatives, after all." Mr. Morrison's face remained impassive. "Let's step into the private room. There are some matters that need to be addressed immediately." As we followed him, I noticed my hand had moved to clutch the key necklace Grandma had given me. Somehow, I knew everything was about to change. Again. I just didn't realize how much. The private room at the church felt too small for the tension building inside it. Mr. Morrison sat across from us at a polished wooden table, methodically arranging papers from his briefcase. My parents flanked me like anxious vultures, trying to appear concerned while their eyes kept darting to the documents. "Before we begin," Mr. Morrison said, adjusting his glasses, "Miss Emma, would you please show me your necklace?" My parents looked confused, but I reached for the key pendant Grandma had given me. Mr. Morrison nodded, a slight smile crossing his face. "Perfect. Now let me read the terms of Rose Montgomery's will." He cleared his throat and began reading. "I, Rose Montgomery, being of sound mind, declare this to be my last will and testament. The legal language washed over me until one sentence made my heart stop. To my beloved granddaughter, Emma Grace Montgomery, I leave my entire estate, including all properties, investments, bank accounts, and business holdings, currently valued at approximately $47 million. The room erupted in chaos. 47 million? Mom shrieked, her face turning red. That's impossible. Rose was a school principal. Dad slammed his hand on the table. This is ridiculous. We're her only children. You can't tell me she left everything to a teenager. Mr. Morrison remained calm. There's more. The will specifies that Emma is to be legally emancipated immediately, with a trust established in her name. The key she wears opens a safety deposit box containing additional documents and instructions. My head was spinning. $47 million? Grandma Rose, my modest, Toyota-driving grandmother, had been worth $47 million. This will is dated just last month, Mom said, her voice dangerous. We'll contest it. Emma's still a minor. We're her legal guardians, and we have rights. Actually, Mr. Morrison interrupted, you surrendered those rights 10 years ago. He pulled out another document. This is a copy of the abandonment charges Rose filed against you both after you left Emma. You never responded to the court summons, so she was granted full legal custody. You haven't been Emma's guardians for a very long time. I watched my parents' faces transform. The fake concern melted away, replaced by naked greed and fury. Emma, sweetie, Mom tried again, her voice honey sweet. You don't understand what you're doing. Let us help you manage this. We're family. Family? The word felt like poison in my mouth. Where was family when you left me? Where was family for 10 years while Grandma Rose raised me? We made a mistake, Dad said quickly. We were young, struggling. But we're here now. We can make it right. Make it right? I stood up, shaking with anger. You're only here because you found out about the money. Did you even care that Grandma died? Did you ever care about me? Their silence was answer enough. Mr. Morrison cleared his throat. There's one more thing. Rose left a letter for you, Emma. He handed me a sealed envelope. She asked that you read it alone. I took the envelope and walked out, leaving my parents protesting behind me. Finding a quiet corner of the church, I opened the letter with trembling hands. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've just learned the truth about our family's wealth. I know it's a shock. I kept it secret for many reasons, but mostly to protect you and let you grow up understanding the value of hard work and kindness. I watched your parents choose money over love many times. They abandoned you because I refused to keep funding their extravagant lifestyle. They chose wealth over their own daughter, and in doing so, gave me the greatest gift, you. The key I gave you opens more than just a safety deposit box. It opens the door to your future. I've made arrangements for everything. The house is yours. Your college fund is secure. The family business awaits when you're ready. But most importantly, remember this. You are loved. Not for your inheritance, but for who you are. The same quiet strength that helped you survive being abandoned has prepared you to handle this responsibility. Don't let your parents manipulate you. They'll try, but you're stronger than they know. You're a Montgomery woman, and we don't break easily. All my love, Grandma Rose. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I finished reading. In death as in life, Grandma Rose was protecting me, guiding me, loving me. I touched the key around my neck, understanding finally flowing through me. When I returned to the private room, my parents were still arguing with Mr. Morrison about contesting the will. They fell silent when I walked in. Emma, Mom started, but I held up my hand. I want you to leave, I said, my voice steady. Both of you. You're not welcome here. Now listen here, Dad began angrily, but Mr. Morrison interrupted. Should I call security? He asked calmly. As the sole heir and property owner, Emma has the right to have you removed. They stared at me, these strangers who shared my blood, and I saw the moment they realized they'd lost. Not just the money, but any chance of manipulating me. This isn't over, Mom hissed as they gathered their things. You'll regret this. I watched them leave, feeling oddly peaceful. What happens now? I asked Mr. Morrison. He smiled. Now we visit that safety deposit box. Your grandmother left quite detailed instructions about the next steps. Shall we? As we left the church, I caught a glimpse of my parents in the parking lot, arguing furiously. They'd lost everything today. Not that they ever really had it. They'd chosen money over love once before, and that choice had finally caught up with them. I touched the key around my neck and smiled. Grandma Rose had given me more than just an inheritance. She'd given me the power to stand on my own, to face whatever came next. And something told me this was just the beginning. The safety deposit box at First National Bank contained exactly what Grandma Rose had promised, and so much more. As Mr. Morrison helped me go through the contents, I discovered just how thoroughly my grandmother had planned everything. Inside were property deeds, stock certificates, and detailed instructions about the family business, Montgomery Investments, a company I'd never even known existed. But what caught my eye was a USB drive labeled "Watch Me First." Mr. Morrison pulled out his laptop, and Grandma Rose's face appeared on screen. She looked healthy, vibrant. This must have been recorded just before she died. "Emma, my darling girl," she began, her familiar smile warming my heart. "If you're watching this, then everything has happened as I expected. Your parents showed up at my funeral, didn't they? Trying to claim what was never theirs to begin with." I gasped. Even from beyond, she'd known exactly what would happen. "You see, Emma, there's something you need to know about your parents. They didn't just abandon you. They tried to steal everything from me first. Your father, my own son, and your mother attempted to transfer all my assets to their names while I was on a business trip. They thought I was just a naive school principal. They never knew I was the one who built Montgomery Investments from the ground up." She paused, her expression hardening. "When I discovered their scheme, I gave them a choice. Stay and live modestly while learning the value of hard work, or leave. They chose to leave. They left you behind thinking I'd come begging them to return. They never understood that by abandoning you, they gave up the greatest treasure of all." Tears streamed down my face as Grandma continued. "I watched you grow into an extraordinary young woman. Kind, intelligent, hardworking. Everything they're not. That's why I know you're ready for this responsibility." The video continued with detailed instructions about the company, the properties, and most importantly, the charitable foundation she'd established. The Montgomery Foundation provides scholarships to abandoned children. You'll be its new director. Use our wealth to help others like yourself, Emma. That's our true legacy. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Mr. Morrison introduced me to the company's board of directors, who'd all known and respected Grandma Rose. They welcomed me warmly, ready to guide me as I learned the business. My parents didn't give up easily. They hired lawyers, tried to contest the will, even attempted to prove Grandma Rose was mentally unstable when she wrote it. But she'd been too thorough. Every document was in order, every decision legally sound. Their final attempt came 3 months later. They showed up at the Montgomery Investments office, causing a scene in the lobby. "We're her parents," Mom shouted as security held them back. "She can't keep us out." I met them calmly, dressed in one of Grandma's elegant suits, the key necklace still at my throat. "Actually, I can, and I will. We'll go to the press," Dad threatened. "Tell everyone how you stole our inheritance." I smiled, channeling Grandma Rose's quiet strength. "Go ahead. Tell them how you abandoned your 8-year-old daughter. Tell them how you tried to steal from your own mother. I'm sure the press will love that story." They deflated, finally understanding they'd lost everything, not just the money, but any chance of manipulating me. "Goodbye," I said firmly. "Don't come back." As I watched them leave, I touched the key around my neck, feeling Grandma's presence with me. That evening, I approved the first round of scholarships from the Montgomery Foundation. 20 children from broken homes would get a chance at a better life. Sitting in Grandma's old office, my office now, I looked at her photo on the wall and smiled. She'd given me more than just an inheritance. She'd given me purpose, strength, and the power to help others. The old Toyota still sits in my garage, even though I could afford any car I want. It reminds me of where I came from, of the humble, hard-working woman who taught me that true wealth isn't about money. It's about how you use it to make the world better. Sometimes I wear her old principal's blazer to board meetings. The board members who knew her smile when they see it. They understand. I'm not just Rose Montgomery's heir, I'm her legacy. As for my parents, I heard they moved to another state, telling anyone who will listen about their ungrateful daughter. But their words can't hurt me anymore. I know who I am. I'm Emma Grace Montgomery, and like my grandmother before me, I choose love over money, kindness over greed, and helping others over helping myself. That's what real family does. Growing up in Maple Grove Estates, I never quite felt like I belonged. The massive houses, perfectly manicured lawns, and luxury cars in every driveway seemed to mock our modest living situation. I'm Emma Mitchell, and my story begins with a barbecue that changed everything. My parents, Thomas and Linda Mitchell, moved into 156 Maple Drive when I was just 5 years old. Back then, the neighborhood was different, warmer, more welcoming. But as property values skyrocketed and wealthy families moved in, the spirit of community slowly eroded into something cold and exclusive. Our house stood out like a sore thumb. While others renovated and expanded, we maintained our simple 2-story home the best we could. Dad worked as a high school teacher, and Mom ran a small flower shop downtown. We weren't poor, but compared to our neighbors, we might as well have been living in poverty. Sarah Henderson, who lived in the mansion next door, never missed an opportunity to remind us of our place in the social hierarchy. Her husband James, CEO of a tech company, would smirk from behind his imported cigars whenever we crossed paths. They represented everything wrong with what Maple Grove had become: wealth without warmth, success without soul. The annual neighborhood barbecue had always been a tradition, dating back decades. This year, it was the Hendersons' turn to host. Mom didn't want to go, but Dad insisted we maintain appearances. "We have as much right to be here as anyone else," he'd said, straightening his collar in the mirror. If only he knew how right he was. That afternoon, I helped Mom prepare her famous potato salad. "Maybe this year will be different," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I nodded, not believing it either. As we walked next door, carrying our contribution to the potluck, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. The Hendersons' backyard was packed with the neighborhood alight. Women in designer sundresses clustered around the pool, while men in polo shirts discussed stock portfolios and golf handicaps. Sarah spotted us immediately, her perfectly Botox face twisting into a practiced smile. "Oh, the Mitchells," she called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "How nice of you to join us. Linda, dear, you can put that." She gestured vaguely at Mom's potato salad. "Over there with the other dishes." I watched Mom's face flush as she placed her carefully prepared dish among the catered spreads. Dad squeezed her hand, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. We found seats at an empty table near the edge of the party. The only empty table, I realized with a sinking feeling. As the afternoon wore on, the subtle jabs became more frequent and less subtle. Sarah's voice carried across the yard as she discussed property values with her equally wealthy friends. "It's just that some properties really bring down the neighborhood's appeal," she said, looking pointedly at our house. "Don't you agree, James?" James Henderson lowered his crystal tumbler of scotch and nodded sagely. "Absolutely, darling. We've discussed this with the Homeowners Association. Perhaps it's time to implement some new standards." My blood boiled, but years of enduring their condescension had taught me to keep my composure. I was about to suggest to my parents that we leave when I noticed an unfamiliar figure walking up the Hendersons' driveway. The man wore an impeccable suit that made even James's designer outfit look cheap. He carried a leather briefcase and moved with purpose. As he approached the gathering, conversations quieted and heads turned. "I'm looking for Emma Mitchell," he announced, his voice clear and professional. Sarah's eyebrows shot up as I stood. "That's me," I said, trying to ignore the whispers that erupted around us. The man nodded and extended his hand. "Jonathan Pierce, from Pierce & Associates Law Firm. I represent the estate of Harold Montgomery. Might we speak privately?" The name hit me like a thunderbolt. Harold Montgomery, my grandfather, whom I'd never met. He'd had a falling out with my father decades ago, long before I was born. All I knew about him came from old photographs and whispered conversations. Sarah, unable to contain herself, sashayed over. "Now surely any business can wait until after our little gathering," she said, placing herself between me and Mr. Pierce. We wouldn't want to disrupt the party. Mr. Pierce's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened slightly. "I'm afraid this matter is rather urgent, Mrs. Henderson. Or should I say, tenant?" The word hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's perfect smile faltered. "I beg your pardon. Perhaps we should all sit down," Mr. Pierce suggested, opening his briefcase. "This concerns the entire neighborhood, actually." The next few minutes felt surreal as Mr. Pierce explained that my grandfather, Harold Montgomery had been the actual owner of all of Maple Grove Estates. He purchased the land decades ago but chose to live elsewhere, allowing a management company to handle the properties. The Hendersons, like everyone else, had been renting from him all these years through a complex network of shell companies. Your grandfather passed away last month, Mr. Pierce continued, addressing me directly. In his will, he left the entire estate, including all of Maple Grove, to you, Miss Mitchell. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's face had gone pale, her manicured hand clutching James's arm so tightly her knuckles turned white. Around us, our neighbors stared in shocked disbelief. That's impossible, James sputtered, finally finding his voice. We own this house. We have the deed. You have a carefully crafted lease agreement, Mr. Pierce corrected, producing a stack of documents. Your monthly property taxes have actually been rent payments. Mr. Montgomery was quite brilliant in how he structured everything. I sat there, struggling to process what I was hearing. The house I'd grown up in, the neighborhood that had made me feel so inferior, it had all belonged to my grandfather. And now, somehow, it all belonged to me. There must be some mistake, Sarah said, her voice rising. We've lived here for 15 years. We've invested hundreds of thousands in renovations, all of which were approved through the management company as per your lease agreement, Mr. Pierce replied calmly. Miss Mitchell now has full discretion over all properties in Maple Grove Estates. I looked at my parents, who appeared equally stunned. Dad's face showed a mix of emotions: shock, confusion, and something else. Pride? Regret? I couldn't quite tell. If you'll excuse us, Mr. Pierce said, standing, Miss Mitchell, and I have some paperwork to discuss. Shall we use your study, Mrs. Henderson? After all, it is Miss Mitchell's property now. As I followed Mr. Pierce into the house, I heard the party dissolving into chaos behind me. Sarah's voice rose above the others, demanding answers, making threats about lawyers and lawsuits. But for the first time in my life, her words had no power over me. Inside the Hendersons' study, Mr. Pierce laid out the full scope of my inheritance. The neighborhood was just the beginning. There were other properties, investments, and accounts I needed to know about. But my mind kept returning to one detail. Did he know? I asked suddenly. My grandfather, did he know how they treated us? Mr. Pierce's expression softened slightly. Mr. Montgomery had eyes and ears everywhere, Miss Mitchell. He watched you grow up from afar, saw how you and your parents handled adversity with grace. In his final years, he spoke often of how proud he was of the family you'd become. Tears welled up in my eyes as I thought of the grandfather I'd never known, watching over us all these years. Outside, I could hear the party completely falling apart as neighbors rushed to their phones, presumably to call their lawyers. What happens now? I asked, wiping my eyes. That, Miss Mitchell, is entirely up to you. The properties, the leases, the future of Maple Grove, it's all in your hands. I nodded, a plan already forming in my mind. The Hendersons had spent years making us feel small, but now the tables had turned. The real question was, what kind of landlord did I want to be? The next morning, I woke up to chaos. News of my inheritance had spread through Maple Grove like wildfire. My phone was flooded with messages, some congratulatory, others panicked, and many from neighbors suddenly wanting to reconnect. Sarah Henderson's number appeared repeatedly, her voicemails growing increasingly desperate. James had apparently spent the night calling every lawyer in the city, only to discover that my grandfather's legal team had ironclad documentation for everything. I sat at our kitchen table, watching Mom prepare breakfast like any other morning. But everything felt different now. Dad kept glancing at the window, where a small crowd of neighbors had gathered, presumably hoping to catch a glimpse of the neighborhood's new owner. What are you thinking, sweetheart? Mom asked, placing a plate of pancakes in front of me. I took a deep breath. I'm thinking about Grandpa, why he did this, what he wanted me to learn. I paused, cutting into my pancakes, and I'm thinking about all the families like us who got pushed out of this neighborhood over the years. Dad looked up from his coffee. Your grandfather, he was a complicated man, Emma. We had our differences, but he always had a strong sense of justice. A knock at the door interrupted our conversation. Mr. Pierce stood there, looking fresh despite the early hour. Good morning, Miss Mitchell. I thought you might want to review the current lease terms. There are some interesting clauses we should discuss. As we went through the documents, a picture emerged that made me smile. My grandfather hadn't just been a shrewd businessman, he'd been playing a long game. The leases all contained provisions that gave the owner extraordinary control over rental terms and community standards. So, I said, looking up from a particularly interesting clause, I could essentially rewrite the entire rental agreement. With proper notice, yes, Mr. Pierce confirmed. Your grandfather ensured maximum flexibility for the property owner. I spent the next few hours drafting new terms with Mr. Pierce's help. By afternoon, we had everything ready. I called for a mandatory community meeting at the neighborhood clubhouse, another property I now owned. The clubhouse was packed that evening. Every resident of Maple Grove had shown up, their faces a mix of worry and curiosity. Sarah and James Henderson sat in the front row, trying to maintain their usual air of superiority despite their obvious distress. Thank you all for coming, I began, standing at the podium. As you've heard, I'm now your landlord. I've spent the day reviewing everyone's lease agreements and I've decided to make some changes. A murmur ran through the crowd. Sarah's hand shot up immediately, but I continued speaking. First, all current rents will be adjusted based on a fair market value assessment, not the inflated rates many of you have been paying. Second, I'm establishing a community board that will include representatives from all income levels. And third, I paused, making eye contact with Sarah. Any form of discrimination or harassment based on economic status will result in immediate lease termination. The room erupted. James Henderson jumped to his feet. This is outrageous. You can't just change everything overnight. We have rights. Actually, Mr. Henderson, Mr. Pierce interjected smoothly. According to your lease agreement, she can. Would you like to review the terms you signed 15 years ago? As James sputtered, I continued. I'm not interested in revenge. What I want is to restore this neighborhood to what it was meant to be, a community where people of different backgrounds can live together with respect. I pulled out another document, which brings me to the Hendersons. Sarah, James, I've reviewed the numerous complaints against you from other residents. The hostile environment you've created, the discriminatory comments, the attempts to force out families who don't meet your standards, it all violates your lease terms. Sarah's face had gone from red to white. You wouldn't dare. I'm exercising my right to terminate your lease, effective immediately. You have 30 days to vacate the property. The silence that followed was broken by a small sound. Someone was clapping. Then another person joined in, and another. Soon half the room was applauding. I saw relief on faces I recognized from years of shared subtle humiliations at the Hendersons' hands. This isn't over, James threatened, standing to leave. Our lawyers will. Your lawyers will find that everything is perfectly legal, Mr. Pierce interrupted. Miss Mitchell, should I show them the documentation your grandfather kept of their lease violations over the years? The Hendersons stormed out, but I wasn't done. One more thing, I announced to the remaining residents. I'm establishing a scholarship fund for local students in a community improvement program. The focus will be on making Maple Grove accessible to families of all income levels while maintaining the quality of life for everyone. Over the next few months, Maple Grove transformed. The Hendersons moved out, their mansion converted into a community center with after-school programs. Other wealthy residents who couldn't accept the changes followed, making room for new families who brought fresh energy to the neighborhood. We kept our modest house exactly as it was, though Mom finally got the garden she'd always wanted. Dad retired from teaching but volunteered at the community center, mentoring kids who reminded him of his younger self. One evening, as I sat on our porch watching children play on lawns that had once been off-limits, I found an old photograph in my grandfather's papers. It showed him standing in front of Maple Grove decades ago, when it was just empty land. On the back, he'd written, "Build something that matters." Sarah Henderson still lives in the city. Sometimes I see her at the grocery store, driving a much more modest car these days. She always looks away quickly, but I notice she no longer carries herself with that same arrogant pride. Last week, I received a letter from a young girl who recently moved into the neighborhood with her single mother. "Thank you," she wrote, "for making a place where we don't have to feel ashamed." I keep that letter on my desk, next to my grandfather's photo. He built something that mattered, all right, not just properties and investments, but a legacy of justice. And now it was my turn to carry it forward. The wealth he left me wasn't just in real estate and bank accounts. It was in the lesson he taught me through this inheritance. True richness isn't measured by the size of your house or the car you drive. but by the community you build and the lives you touch. As I watch Maple Grove flourish, growing more diverse and vibrant with each passing day, I think about how sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in making others suffer, but in creating something beautiful from the ashes of their cruelty. And in the end, that's worth more than all the mansions in the world.